Imagine if you always felt different for most of your life. Like the world wasn't quite designed for how your mind works. It's like you're always using a different operating system than everybody else. You feel scattered, like you can't quite juggle everything. Others seem to do it fine, you know? But you find yourself constantly apologizing or trying to rationalize why you can't remember or finish tasks, just like everybody else can. At first, it's your parents who are voicing their frustration with your inability to pay attention or even finish, your task or your chores. But then your teachers begin to call you out, make an example of you in front of others in your class. All this is happening. You're also being told very conflicting things like how gifted you are and how smart you are. Yet your grades don't reflect it as you struggle to complete your work. You're an avid learner and you love immersing yourself deep in new and weird topics. But the schoolwork is like torture. Like you just can't fucking finish it. Everything else is just so much more interesting. You have difficulty remember details, plans, and especially things like birthdays and stuff like that. And as you get older, your friends and then eventually your romantic partners start to vent that frustration at you, just kind of like how your parents did, because you're forgetting plans or you're not taking care of things like you said you would. And you have so much more potential and all of this ability, yet you feel more and more like a failure, both to the world and to yourself. And you begin to look at yourself as this underachiever. You see people succeed and find success that you feel have the same capabilities as you do, perhaps even less. And you don't know why you can't get yourself to follow through. It's not like that you lack desire or effort. You have a sea of unfinished projects that you would dive deep into and completely lose yourself in for days, months, sometimes even years, only to hit a wall and move on to something else. So why the hell can't you just follow through? Why can't you be consistent? Why is everything so goddamn hard? And then one day, something happens. You have a conversation with somebody, or you see a post on Reddit, or there's some video trending on TikTok, and where they express all these things that they themselves are struggling with and how difficult their ADHD is. Then it hits you. Oh my God. Do I have ADHD? I thought that was just for super hyperactive kids in school that can't pay attention. Fuck. So then you begin Googling, looking at all the traits of adult ADHD, and it hits you. This might really actually be me. So you consult a doctor, and within like 5 minutes, they're like, yep, dude, you got it. And after you go through the rest of the intake process, you come out with a script. You go and you go to the pharmacy, you pick it up. Then the next day you wake up, you nervously take the pill. And within an hour, it's like you see color for the first time. You can think clearly. You didn't realize how chaotic your mind was until it just stopped. You spent the last hour, it dawns on you, you just spent the last hour actually doing what you planned on doing. You didn't, get sidetracked doing your laundry or taking out the trash or checking on if there's any updates on your Amazon shipment that they say is going to get here tomorrow, but you haven't gotten that notification that it's been shipped yet, and you're really, really unsure if Bezos is going to get it to you in time. And then, then you get distracted by Reddit or some Instagram thing, and you go down a fucking rabbit hole for an hour. No, none of that. You just fired off those emails you need to do. And each one of them just took 3 minutes instead of 30, like you would have done, constantly rewriting it and rewriting because you weren't sure if it was the right thing to say or not. And it just dawns on you. Holy shit. Have I been living on hard mode this whole fucking time? Is this how everybody else lives? Why did nobody tell me? Like, why the fuck did I have to struggle for 23 years of my life? This is the experience that I had. We have a mental health epidemic here in the United States. And the number of untreated people, or even undiagnosed altogether, is staggering. I meet people on a weekly basis, sometimes daily basis, that I know pretty much immediately, like, you got ADHD. And more often than not, they're entirely unaware of it. And for me, like I said, this happened to me when I was 23. What happens if it happens in your 40s, your 50s, or 60s? How crushing would it be knowing such a large part of your life you've been living on hard mode? Well, our guest today has experienced just that. Today, we're going to be speaking with Mark Cann. Mark is an entrepreneur, growth marketer, and now mental health advocate. He's the founder of HYPAA, a recently launched science-backed ADHD education platform with the advisory of a prominent neuroscientist and dietitian. The platform offers courses that deliver practical insights, techniques, and dietary and exercise protocols to help individuals with ADHD improve their focus, productivity, and overall well-being. We dove into quite a lot, everything around ADHD and beyond, including the challenges of getting diagnosed as an adult and its impact on your self-worth, relationships, and career, the science behind ADHD and the benefits of exercise, diet, and medication, the need for more self-awareness and understanding about ADHD in our society. We share our very, very painfully learned lessons about, kind of coping and while being an entrepreneur, and how to delegate, time management, prioritization, which is mighty difficult. Just being an entrepreneur as a period, let alone having ADHD, it is difficult. Spoilers: entrepreneurs are 4 times more likely to have ADHD than the general population. So we zero in on that quite a lot in the conversation. We also reflect on burnout, need for self-care, kind of how you're going into your 30s and your 40s, how you kind of notice your social circle kind of changes, and going into next phase. We kind of talk about that ourselves, and then how ADHD informs Mark's approach to parenting now that he's recently a father. And we also kind of look into how we think the future is going to be impacted with ADHD research and everything else when it comes to AI, and lots more. I always love talking with my boy Mark. If you like this, definitely go back to our previous chat. I think it was episode 4 or something on the pod. We dove much more into his journey and how he kind of authentically handles sales and networking as a natural kind of charismatic person, and how if you're an introvert, maybe some of the lessons that you can kind of pick up. And that particularly might be interesting to go back and listen, because I think we recorded that before he got diagnosed. So I'm actually going to go back and listen to that myself, and it might be interesting to kind of hear. Maybe there's some clues there that neither of us picked up on. But anyway, all that said, let's dive into this. I bring you the great and powerful Mark Cann. I think it was like you and I knew each other for like a year before you went to get diagnosed, and I think like you and I had several conversations about ADHD that may have been, I don't know, somewhat pushes of like going to get diagnosed yourself. So like, at what point you got diagnosed? Like super late in life. Like it was like I was like 23, I think. And I one of my one of my friends at the time like gave me an Adderall, and he's just like, "Hey, just try this. I think this is gonna help you." And then I took it, and I was like, "Oh my god! Like I can see colors. like it was just like fucking Wizard of Oz. Like everything's in color. Like like, oh my god, I could think much more clearly."
Yeah.
And it was just crazy. I was just like, I was doing my entire life on hard mode. Like I didn't
Oh
know it
yeah,
was
yeah,
like this.
totally.
And that's when I was like, okay, I'm gonna go get diagnosed. And then I got a script and all the other stuff. But um, so like, at what was the point in which you're just like, okay, I'm gonna go see. I think I have ADHD. And like, did you ever kind of have an inkling, like growing up or like through your adult life, that you had
Well,
it?
so in the UK, it wasn't really a thing. There was when I was a kid, I went to go see a specialist, and that was their kind of take on things was, either psychological, like how are the parents? Parents were fine. Everybody kind of who knew them were like, oh, you got such wonderful parents, and I had sort of hyperactive problems, so they couldn't really figure it out, and then went down a different angle of going to a it was like a complementary, it was called like complementary therapist, and it was basically like around salicylates in food and how I should be on a different diet to not be hyperactive. So it was really, really like behind and not understood. And actually, I think the only, if you go on like Google Trends, you actually see that between like 2019 or 2020, the last 3 years, there's been a surge in searches for ADHD in the UK, whereas I think in the US they've diagnosed and treated it at kind of much earlier. I think, and the other thing is just like the waiting list. So you, because of the surge in people sort of realizing, oh, actually that kind of, they'll see something on Instagram or TikTok and go, yeah, I've got that problem. Loads of people are going to their doctors or their GPs and asking to get referred to then to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and that's taking like a minimum of a year, and then up
Wow.
to 3 years in some areas. So some people are opting to do that privately, but then obviously there's a cost with that as well, isn't there? So it really depends on the person and how they feel. But I kind of, I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember what the actual trigger was, but I think it was during lockdown, and I was working on some stuff, and I just couldn't get anything done, and I was just like, oh, I wonder why this is,
Hmm.
and then I kind of looked at other symptoms around that just through googling and various other research, and just thought, oh, actually, this kind of does make a lot of sense. So
Hmm.
yeah, that was it. But like I said, there just was very little awareness about it in the UK. And funnily enough, actually, when I interviewed a neuroscientist, Dr. Matt Parker, one of my questions was, what do you think has progressed or basically like over the last 20 years? I guess I was referring to myself in terms of like when I would have started going to school and university, college and university. And then basically he was like, well, I would like to say we've advanced, but he said, I don't really think we are there yet. We haven't advanced that much in 20 years. So I think for certain conditions, it's been very, very slow
Yeah.
to look at this, and that's right across other areas of neurodiversity, I think, as well.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's interesting just to see like the development, how fast everything is developing in certain sectors, like you're saying, and then in others, it's just like snail's pace, like
Yeah,
very little development. Even like a lot of the medications like just seem kind of crude. I mean, we can talk about it later, but like Adderall has so and a lot of these stimulants have so many downsides, and it's just like you'd think we would have something better at this point, but um,
and
when
instead
you
we've
were
got a shortage in the UK of medication right now. So
yeah,
it's
yeah, I think
like
it's a
if you actually eventually get diagnosed, then you might not be able to go on what it is that they're basically suggesting because they've run out. So
yeah. I actually had a friend of mine who like he was in New York and they just straight out ran out. And he was on an active script. Like he had an active script and like he was on it for 2 years or something like that. And then they just ran out. And so the withdrawals are a son of a bitch, dude. They're bad. And so he was asking me, he's like, is there anything I can take to supplement it? And I'm like, yeah, L-tyrosine, you can take this, you can take that. And there's several things I was recommending to him. I'm like, it's not going to be Adderall, but it'll at least help get you by and like help, wean off the withdrawal. And it did seem to actually help him. But, people that don't have access to that or don't have somebody like me to kind of go off of, like, I it's got to be crazy, like just that withdrawal of and to no fault of their own, like I kind of wonder like how many people like that had that happen, like lost their jobs or ended relationships or whatever, just because like the crash is so bad,
yeah.
not having it, and it's just brutal. But so like when you were looking into it and doing the research, initially before you got diagnosed, like one of the things I asked a couple people leading up to us talking that I know that have ADHD, and I'm just like, what's been the your experience with it, and is there anything you want to talk about, blah blah. And the thing that kept coming up time and time again is like the definition
Mm.
of what ADHD is. And I think it's just like with, and this is a double-edged sword. It's like, with the rise of TikTok, you're saying in the last couple of years there's been like this influx of people, and I think it's the rise of like TikTok and a lot of these other social media platforms where everyone's like my wife Ava, like she's constantly showing these ADHD TikToks and stuff like
Yeah.
that. It's like she doesn't have it, but I do. So like, so you go down that algorithm and she's sending me stuff, and it's all these memes that basically just like, show me, tell me you have ADHD if I tell me you have ADHD, and all these other
Yep.
things and stuff. And it's really good in the essence that it's raising awareness. And I'm sure it's helping a tremendous amount of people. Like I've seen it on Reddit. I've seen on Reddit people posting stuff like that. And then they're just like, I might have ADHD, and it's just like, I think that's amazing. But at the same time, I also see that watching some of that stuff, it can be funny, but sometimes I'm like, I don't, it's almost kind of like, um, downplaying the seriousness of it, A, in a way.
Yeah.
And B, I feel like the kind of zeitgeist, if you will, of ADHD is a lot of people like, oh, I'm just being ADHD, or oh, I have ADHD, or whatever. But it's almost just like the line between like what is actually clinical ADHD and what's just like someone being a little scatterbrained or someone just being a little lazy or procrastinating or whatever. Like, um, it's a little more blurred, I think. And so like that's been an issue is a lot of people that I know, and we can get into the entrepreneurship and like kind of professional side of it later, because that's a whole stigma and everything. There's a whole other element to it. But like it seems like it's people have a hard time identifying and knowing like, okay, oh, that's me, that's not me. And I even I even ran a list by one of my friends that I did it by, like, this is the definition, the DSM of it. And they're just like, that list seems very vague in general. And I still don't know if that actually, like, he's been diagnosed, but he's like, if I just saw that list, I wouldn't actually know if that applies to me or not. So
Mm.
like, did you like, what's your kind of interpretation of that as far as like the definition and like people identifying with it or not?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the first thing, the definition, there's two types of ADHD, isn't there? So there's ADHD hyperactive type, and then there's ADHD inattentive. And you think it used to be called ADD.
Mm,
And then there's like the combined type. And I think one of the confusing parts of that is you'll find a lot of young boys who have got ADHD hyperactive type who will then grow up and try and blend into society and realize that some of the behaviors
yeah.
won't be accepted. So they'll actually sort of transition to inattentive type, which probably describes me basically. And I think the other thing is like undiagnosed ADHD. So a lot of young girls aren't diagnosed, and basically with inattentive type because it's not as easy to spot some of the some of the symptoms basically. But it can be fidgeting, those kind of things, not being able to concentrate or listen. I think is a few of the things, and I think so. The main difference I would say is ADHD is a neurological condition, and the way that I would explain the difference is that psychological I almost see as something that you have a choice to do, whereas part of ADHD within the neurological makeup of it is you have impulsivity, and impulsivity means you can't control how you're going to react to something because you react impulsively. So therefore
Mm,
it's harder to control. So if somebody was, depressed or anxious, that kind of thing, then they would suggest you go and get therapy and you maybe do CBT and other things. But if something is being controlled by, your brain, so it's within the construct of that, then because it's a neurological makeup, there is very few things that you can actually do to then control that part of it, which is the impulsivity part. And obviously, ADHD is not just impulsivity, there's other elements to it. But I think it's important to recognize, and I think where it starts to blend the line of are you just forgetful, are you lazy, procrastinate, that kind of thing, is generally that I think that would be down to like, is it affecting your life so badly that you are losing relationships, losing jobs? Is it affecting it in a particularly negative way, not in a, oh, I'm having a bad day? That's very different. So yeah, that's kind of how I would view it. I don't think there's a hard or a straight line, which is why I think it should be diagnosed by psychiatrists over, people doing like kind of an online survey and looking at the most common questions and sort of diagnosing themselves. But again, it makes it even harder because if you've got this particularly long waiting time, then you
Yeah.
are going to go into self-diagnosis, self-research, all of those, Dr. Google, because you need to do something about this problem that you have. And it's kind of, it's very, it's a difficult time to go through, is actually, knowing that you have a problem, but you haven't been medically diagnosed for it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And like, did it manifest, like, if you look back, like, so for me, and this has happened to me twice now. I've talked about it before on the pod, but like, it's like I have been diagnosed with two, mental illness conditions, whatever, and they happen in different parts of my life. And the reoccurring theme is that it's made me recontextualize, like, you say, like, the common trope of like when you die, your whole life flashes before you. It's like I kind of had that happen where I'm just like, oh my god, so many things make sense, and you have this wave of emotions. Because for me, like, like, I was diagnosed at 23 of ADHD and then bipolar type 2 when I was like, what, 28, 30, 29, something, somewhere around those lines, I forget. And so like what happened for me was, like, with ADHD, I'm just like, I went through this journey of emotions that took place over the course of like a week where I'm just like, at
Yeah.
first I'm just like, oh shit, okay, this makes total sense. And then like with the Adderall, it was just like, oh, okay, this just unlocked something in me. And there was a gap between, trying that and then getting diagnosed and then getting the medication or whatever. So I had a taste. And as you know, like when you go on something like Adderall or Vyvanse or Ritalin or whatever, it's like there's a little bit of that kind of euphoric kind of feeling the first couple of days that you do it. And then that kind of dissipates and goes away or minimizes, and you get into a baseline. So knowing what I know now, there was a little bit of that, kind of like manic euphoria. But really, to me, it was just like, it, it was just like, okay, that's possible. Like that, like being able to like interface with people and work and reality in that way. It was interesting because I had that period of like, probably about a month in between, um, trying it and then getting diagnosed and then formally getting on the medication and then trying it. And so that entire time I'm like doing research and I'm doing all this stuff. And it's just like this whole world of possibilities that I didn't even know. So that was leading up to it. And then when I got on it, it got diagnosed and then all this other stuff, I'm sitting here thinking, like, as I'm doing all this research and reading books, I'm just like, this makes so much sense. Like my childhood, like all of these issues that I've had, like, that I beat myself up over. And I thought I was just failing, like, oh, okay, well, I'm procrastinating on this thing, or like I can't I start this project, but I just can't fucking finish it. Or
Mm.
like, why is it that I set, I wake up and I want to do this thing. And then by the end of the day, like none of that got done. Where did my day go? And then I go back through the Rolodex. I'm like, oh, I did this, I did this, I did this. And it's like all those things, some of which were productive, some of which were not. But that's where my day went. And I didn't do, the original thing that I planned on doing. And then I beat myself up over it, being like, man, why can't I just do this? And so it's just like this lifetime of this accumulation of all these things that I just thought were personal failures of myself. And it's like, oh no, you have a fucking neurological condition. So it made me both frustrated. Like, why did nobody in my life, like, at some point notice this? Like, my family, or more so than anything, like, my family, like, they just didn't know. They weren't
Mm.
knowledgeable. So, like, I don't blame them really. But, like, people in my school, like, there was a guidance counselor that should have known about it. And, like, they picked up on some of the issues that I was having, but they like pulled me aside and I actually like talked with them. but they never at any point connected the dots and be like, maybe Josh should go see, a psychiatrist or psychologist or any of this stuff. And I'm just like, it was frustrating. Like there was so many periods along the way. I'm like, man, I wish my doctor or somebody would have like noticed this. Like, there's just so many, so there was that, there was this feeling of like, um, empathy for myself and kind of looking at my younger self and even myself currently at the time and being like, oh, okay, like being kinder. But there's just this wave of emotions that I felt and I had to recontextualize everything. So
Yeah.
it's
So
like, did you experience that?
yeah, I did. So I think you touched on a few things there. I think the first one is the kind of I guess what's termed in the ADHD community as rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or RSD for short.
Uh-huh.
And that is basically because you've had a lifetime of at school, at work, don't do that, pay attention. You just need to finish things, and generally kind of quite negative criticism, but maybe not a lot of positive encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
Then some of those things are you're going to be more sensitive to than other people. One thing that I looked at only recently actually was the understanding of other people. So I'm okay if I don't know you or we've just met and you don't know some of the quirks of ADHD. But if you're my friend and you've known me for a long time, like that you shouldn't say, oh, like why can't you just be here on time? Try harder, blah blah blah. Like all of these
Yeah.
things. It's like, yeah, I know I can do some incredibly complicated things, but those things that you find really simple, I really struggle with. And that is why, so generally it's kind of, I think as you get older with ADHD as well, is you probably shrink your social circle in terms of the people who understand and the people who don't, I think is another common
For
thing.
sure.
But the big realization for me was because there was so little support afterwards. There was, here's some meds, now get on with it. I'm not your therapist. And it's just like, and then you can try CBT, and maybe that works for some people. But if you're impulsive, how are you going to challenge your thought and then write it down and everything else? These are all things that adults with ADHD struggle with. So it's not really a system of therapy that I believe at least is not really designed for people with ADHD. So I think, yeah, and just going back to what you were saying about that kind of whole sort of post diagnosis kind of what ifs kind of thing. Part of me was like, oh, so like I would have been a lot more successful, and
Oh
there's
yeah.
people
Yeah.
who are this age, the same age as me or younger, that are doing this, and I should have been able
Mm-hmm.
to do that by now. And I couldn't really understand it before diagnosis. In that I was like, well, I've done IQ tests and did okay at university, and people tell me every now and again, Mark, you're intelligent, bright guy, so it's just like, what was it that meant that I couldn't get done what I needed to get done? And then that kind of provided some clarity, I think. But yeah, I mean, it's very difficult, I think, that first month afterwards, I'd say.
Yeah, for sure. And I absolutely felt to a really crazy degree, both before and after, just like, you know, why the success thing that you just mentioned. Like, why is it people that are my peers that some of which were kind of had all the same opportunities that I did, some of which had even less, and like, they blew up. I mean, like, I've talked about it before. I think you and I have, is like, I grew up doing kind of homeschooling. I was like the first year that you could do it online here in the state of Ohio. And like, I kind of just blew off the schoolwork most of the year. And then I just waited until the last 2 weeks and just, stayed up all night and busted it out, which now I'm like, that's a super ADHD thing to do. but, um,
uh,
but yeah, like I spent most of my time like building websites and communities and doing online marketing, a lot of stuff, which is why I had, I've been doing this for going on 20 or going
it
on or at 20 years now, which is
Yeah, but
going.
the thing that will really, like, I don't know what the analogy is, like get your pickle or whatever. I'm sure there's a better way of putting it, is would you be as ambitious if you didn't have ADHD?
Yeah,
There you
yeah.
go,
Do you
right? So
think you
if
would?
you do all the extra things, do you go, like for me it was like doing the work experience at the university, redesigned the whole student magazines, went up to Canary Wharf in London, won the student the best magazine design in the country. Would I have done all that, and would I have tried as hard if I didn't have those negative experiences in education around failing and not completing things? And
Hmm.
I think that's kind of that's kind of the conundrum, isn't it? And also it's like self-awareness. Like, do you find yourself catching yourself out and going, oh, hang on a minute, I do need to complete this because this is quite important, but I know that I'm going through a period of um like lack of energy, boredom, something has affected me emotionally today, so maybe I'm just not going to be able to do it today. Rather than just kind of like, oh, I failed at this kind of thing. Like there's sort of black and white thinking, and then there's like, oh, hang on a minute, is there a way that I can pull myself out of this situation? I'm not going to feel any better, but I'm at least going to be self-aware, kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. And like for me, like I would hyper fixate on things.
Yeah,
And like so like like going back to middle school, high school, me, it's just like I would I was really into like Halo, like the video game, like the original and the Halo 2, and like I built a community and did all that stuff, and then that was pretty successful actually, and then I just kind of dropped it one day. I started a completely different community, and I had a problem, like for example, where I had a successful community for one thing that had like tens of thousands of users, which was like very successful. And then I started slowly morphing it into a different community where like I added, like it was a bulletin board, like a forum, like PHPBB back in the day. And I just added an additional section to the forum about a completely different other topic that I was interested in. And then people started coming to the forum for that. And then at one point it was like 50-50, like one topic to the other, completely unrelated. So then I renamed the site like something else. And like both communities were just like, I don't get this. And then it just was a mess. And it's just like, I couldn't, it's like anything that I was working on, I had to make it, and this is still something I deal with. Anything I'm working on, like I have to make it about whatever my interest is, like right now.
yeah.
And like I look back, and I was just like, it would have made more sense if I just had that one community and I just started a separate community that was completely separate. But in my brain, I'm like, it all has to fit together, and and so like that's one tab. The second tab is like there were other people that were doing those communities or were doing affiliate marketing or doing building these like brands and stuff online that were around my age, or I would say they were in their young early 20s, and like we kind of were around the same level of experience because I was on like a lot of these like internet marketing forums and stuff like that, and I made a bunch of friends on there. And some of these people just blew up, like some of which very, very, very successful now. And I'm just like, why is that not me? I had all these opportunities, like these forums, tens of thousands of users and stuff. Like you could take that and build something very serious off of that pretty quickly if you'd make the right moves. But then as soon as I got traction, I like let it go because like my interest went somewhere else. And like it was like painful to work on that thing after a while because I was bored of it.
Is
And
that
so I just had these like all these projects that were like, you know, half where they needed to be, and I just discarded them, and it made me really beat myself up because I just felt like a failure.
But would you say, because obviously this podcast, when you started it, I think I was episode 4 or something. So you
Yeah,
have
yeah,
you
really,
have
really.
stuck with something for quite a long time, haven't you? And
Yeah.
that quite a significant amount of time investment, not just in the recording of the episodes, but curating the network, who you want on there, how they all fit together, that kind of thing. That's a significant achievement in itself, isn't it? Is actually like getting all that together when, like you said, you've got kind of you will have lots of half finished projects, or which is funny because we both work in marketing and we're encouraged to do sprints, which would be like
Hmm.
do marketing and try this technique for 2 weeks to a month, and if it doesn't work, just bin it. So I
Yeah,
wonder,
yeah,
that's kind of like very ADHD in itself, isn't it? Just try lots of things and see what sticks.
yeah. I mean, that's my life. I'm doing a series of split test.
Yeah.
several of the podcasts that I've been on, other people's podcasts, like they've named the episodes like split testing your life. Like that's so it's like it's one of those things where it's like I now look back I'm curious to get your take on this, but like my advice to my younger self or anybody that's listening is like you're playing the long game. And for
Mm,
me it's like you mentioned the podcast. It's like, yeah, I've been doing it for over 2 years now, and I don't foresee myself stopping anytime soon. Like this is something that I actually think will be probably the only lifelong thing that I do. And when I say lifelong, it's like it will evolve. It might not just be like this format and the way that I'm doing it now, but like this thing of like connecting with people and sharing these conversations is something that I've always loved doing. I've been doing it for a long time. I just haven't been recording it. And so like I think part of what has made this easy for me, it's still not easy, to your point, hundreds of hours over the last couple of years doing this, legit hundreds of hours. It's so much work that people don't see behind the scenes, is just the fact that it is like fluid, and I can interview whoever the fuck I want. And like I know as a marketing professional, like it would be a lot easier if I just picked a niche, you know like, okay, I'm just gonna do this, or even if it's just like mental health for entrepreneurs, like I could build a thing off of that and do it, and I think it would grow organically a lot faster. But I know I would get bored of it. There's a couple podcasters that I know recently that are like kind of shelving their podcast because they've been doing it for a year, 2 or 3, and they've kind of like had all the conversations in that area that they reasonably feel like they could have, and they're just kind of bored. And it's not,
mm.
and so it's like I want to avoid that. It's harder, but I think the one thing I would say is like you're playing the long game, and what you're doing is you are testing all these different things. And I think that's one of the superpowers that people have with ADHD, is like being able to hop between all these different things and gaining that very broad set of experience, jack of all trades, and then that makes you have a very unique intersection of experiences and skills that like other people who are much more narrow minded, and there's pros and cons to both approaches for sure, but like just leaning into that. And for me, I thought that was a con for a very long time. Like I beat myself up over it because I'm like, why can't I just focus on this one thing? But now I'm like, I wouldn't be who I was. I couldn't do all these things that I'm doing if I didn't have this. So it's
I
just
think
like,
one of the problems is because, in general, like entrepreneurs and people who have been diagnosed with ADHD are very creative.
mhm,
They also love to learn. I've found that's like the common theme. And if you love to learn, you're probably into self improvement. And at some point, the self improvement books that you've read, podcasts, um, films, whatever, a lot of the advice is probably aimed at people who are neurotypical. So that's why the standard, or what it is that you're measuring up against, is like, oh well, I haven't done this. Something I heard the other day, which I really like resonated with. I think is it the guy behind Dilbert? Is it Scott Galloway?
Scott Adams.
Scott Adams, sorry, Scott Adams. And I think it was like he was saying, like, instead of being like the top 2% or 5% copywriter, he's like, why not be the top 10% in the world at perhaps copywriting combined with video editing combined with public speaking, and then all of a sudden
Yeah.
you've got a bit of you know a killer combo that is very, very hard to replicate, basically. So it's figure and for most people the hard bit is figuring out what that is. And actually, like, then it's, I think, probably the biggest barrier to actually, like, after you figure out what that is like confidence, like actually going and executing on that, because you confident that you're good enough to then go
Yeah.
and do it, basically.
Yeah. And I
um
think that's the issue, is that a lot of people are insecure because you're kind of in a unique space, like, um, David C. Baker is an amazing kind of expert, and he talks about the positioning, like he's for him, he's kind of the consultant for consultants, marketing agencies, whatever. But like his stuff applies to anybody, where it's just like, if you are not unique and you're a generalist, like, so an example is like, oh, we're a full service marketing agency, meaning, you do everything like, design, copywriting, website design, app development, all this other crap. Um, okay, well, what's your secret sauce? Like what is the thing that makes you unique? And for a lot of people, it's just like, oh, we're local. We're based in, Portsmouth. We're based in London. We're based in Dayton. And it's like, okay, well, that's great, but you're interchangeable with all the other, you know, 10 dozens or hundreds of other firms that are in that region. What makes you unique?
It's
Truly.
I always go back to like the builder's analogy, right? So I don't know if it's the same in the US, but in the UK, you go by the builder that gets recommended. Because if you go on a website and you find somebody that's got a really fancy website or, loads of good reviews, it's still a bit sort of questionable whether they're a good builder because they're not busy. And
Hmm.
so a lot of what you just said, we do a bit of everything as a digital marketing agency. They've built their business off a previous job, contacts that they know, and people referring them. And so the ironic thing is that the digital marketing agency doesn't market itself. It
Yep.
normally
Yep.
survives off referrals and mostly inbound from. So it's kind of and it has been like that for a long time. I think I used the analogy that they're on Companies House at one point, which is like the directory for companies in the UK. There was more digital marketing agencies and consultants than cleaning companies, which is actually it's a very very good but competitive business, the cleaning business. So
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, one person that comes to mind immediately, and he's been on the podcast a couple times before, is Christopher Silvestri. And like the thing that makes him unique is like he's a copywriting expert, but he's also a UX expert. So it's
yeah,
just like he's
that's
the
right.
intersection of UX copywriting. And I've brought him on many projects because that's a super unique. And to me, and I think to you, it's just like, okay, that's an obvious, you know,
Combination, yeah.
combination, but it's surprisingly rare for an
Mm,
individual. I mean, for teams, lots of design companies, agencies, whatever, have, UX people and copywriting people in house, but to have an individual specialize in those two things, they complement each other so well. And
mm,
like, what's interesting is the peripherals of those two skills uh, are very holistic and they complement each other. And I think that's the thing, like with the ADHD, is like you you lean into that where it's like, yeah, you find that intersection of those different things and it makes you super unique and stand out, where you're not just a full service marketing agency in Dayton, Ohio.
yeah.
You're this person that like anybody in the world is like, oh, I want to work with you because you're doing something that nobody else is doing. And I think if there are any like superpowers with ADHD, like I think that's definitely one of them, is just like having such a diverse set of interests and accumulating. But I think unless you have that pointed out to you, or unless you just are become old enough in your life where you've kind of reached a point of self understanding and success, I
Yeah.
think that's like lost. It was lost on me for a very long time. Was that the same thing for you?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, I know growing up as a kid, I had like hyperfixations, and it would always be like the next thing that came along. But then I think also it's like how you discover things and how you like emotionally engage in those things that you discover. So for me, it was when I was at college, I felt quite lost, and
Mm.
we had like two graphic design lecturers who did like the multimedia class at the time. God, that sounds old, doesn't it? But but basically, like one of them started teaching me graphic design using like Photoshop and Flash and stuff, and I just absolutely loved it. And I just found that I was very like intuitive with it, and it was just like, oh, this is quite cool. And what I noticed in hindsight, which was great, is that you want to, and I am stealing this from Reid Hoffman's book, but you want to pick the thing that has the highest option value. And I thought design was actually quite a good one for that because you can mock up things, and copywriting would be another one where it's like really valuable skill that you can be using over and over and over again in different capacities, whether it's to sell yourself, colleagues, um, friends and family, whatever, trying to communicate and persuade your ideas. But also, it's just a much more useful skill that can lead on to other things.
Yeah.
And I just find that if you can find what that skill is for you, And it could be that you've got ADHD and you're just incredibly good with data,
Hmm.
or mathematics and that kind of thing. And it's like, oh, okay, so that is your utility and your skill, which will then allow you to communicate your ideas, which will then, if combined with those other skills that we just spoke about.
Yeah. Do you think there are like any super outside of that? Do you think there's any like superpowers with ADHD, or does that concept bother you? Because and we can get to the entrepreneurship stuff later, but like that is something that like I've seen where it's just like these high powered founders, and ADHD is a superpower, and it's just like, yeah, that's kind of true in some regards, but also it has significant deficits that I think balance it out. But do you?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of schools of thought there, isn't there? In terms of if we say ADHD as a superpower, it's a positive thing, but then it actually negates what we talked about earlier, which is actually understanding what ADHD is, rather than oh, this is what I've heard it is in the media or something like that. And I think
Mhm.
it's if we don't have understanding of what it actually is and what some of the challenges are around it, then we can't just move straight to ADHD as a superpower, because let's be honest, it has its bad days. So it's just kind of yeah. So I would say, are there any superpowers? I mean, I would say intuition's a huge one for me. I'd say like
For sure.
8 or 9 times out of 10, if I'm unsure about someone, I've been right.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's a massive thing. I'm able to read the situation and people and the way they are, and figure out if somebody there's something not quite right about them, and then I find out later on, oh, actually that person wasn't trustworthy, etc., etc. So I think that is part of it. I think the networking is an incredible skill, and I don't know if that is completely wide across ADHD. Obviously, it's something you're good at and I'm good at, but maybe not everybody who's got ADHD has. But I think that kind of ability to probably to get people to like you, I think, is probably from you know probably from early childhood, where you haven't fit in, and therefore you, in some ways and in some situations, you've been a people pleaser like later on in life. I think that's kind of one of
Mhm.
the things. And I'm trying to think what else there is. I feel like I'm quite calm in, like, quite difficult situations. I
Yeah.
tend
Same.
to react quite quickly and go, "Oh, this is what I need to do." I had to when my daughter was like super young, I had to get home. I was only like 10 minute drive, but she had like a bit of something. I think it was like hair or something wrapped around her finger. But if you don't do something about it quickly, you have to go to hospital. And I just sort of like calmly drove home, because I knew I put myself in almost a bit of adrenaline, but I put myself in a situation where I need to be useful here. So therefore, I
Mhm.
was like, I'm not going to be emotional. I'm just going to be useful. And so when I got there, I was able to quickly, undo it, and then basically, take her to the hospital. But it's like, though, I think those kind of things, being calm in a difficult situation, potentially. Um, yeah, I'm sure there are others, but yeah.
Yeah. What do you think the biggest misconceptions are about ADHD? And this is something that, like, perhaps personally, like, as you researched it and became much more aware of it, like, that you might have thought going into it was something, or the opposite. But then also, like, people in general, like, you've been working on this, the course and everything else, all the people you've talked to, and then the TikTok thing that we talked about earlier, like the social media. Like, what do you think the biggest misconceptions are in general?
It's probably like the hyper focus and having like lots of energy. So I think so the first one, hyper focus, is being able to work for like hours on end on a topic. But really, no one's really discussed what people are hyper focusing on. So one of the things is you could be completely the wrong prioritization, and that's like on
Mm-hmm.
or off medication. And so hyper focusing for hours on end on stuff that doesn't really move the needle and doesn't matter is not really like a great thing, because there's like not as much choice there. And then the biggest one for me personally would be like the energy factor. So it's a misconception that adults with ADHD have like almost like a Duracell bunny level of energy. Um, what the body and the brain is going through is you're basically using up a lot more energy, and that is exhausting to the point where you might get kind of more kind of tired earlier on. Um, so I think that can have like a number of different effects. It can have effects at work, but it can also have effects on your relationship as well. Because if you've used all up your energy and your focus and concentration and everything to get your work done, then when you get home, it's how do you then replenish that energy?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like there's speaking with various different people about it. There's different, and I've noticed this not just with adults with ADHD, but neurotypical people as well. Is that where we've had a pandemic and people have been working from home, they used to have a commute and they'd have like almost like a reset or a rest where they could go from one modality of like I'm work mark to now I'm a dad, a
Mm.
husband. I'm like fun mark, come and bring some energy on the way home and stuff. And I actually had to do that where I set an alarm on my phone to be like, oh, it's like basically like kind of like party time or something like that for my daughter, and then it would like go off like I think it was 5 or 6 p.m. and then I would kind of go right, okay, so I need to be in a different frame even if I've had like a particularly challenging day at work. And so I think that's one of the most misconceived parts of it is the kind of the endless energy. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And it seems to me like that, kind of commute or driving home or whatever, those buffer periods, like when you said that, the thing that came to mind is like it's a mindfulness and like in a way like a meditation practice. Like you are kind of creating buffer and clearing that space and taking a break from the movie of your life or whatever's going on, and having that internal space, which is a form of meditation in its own way. And I know meditation has significantly helped me. There's so many times when it's like you've got I often, the movie of your life, like you're the main character, and I often say it's just like you have like a Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross soundtrack, going in the back of my head, like scoring, and it's just everything is high and intense. It used to be like not so much anymore, but I used to have like this, and I would actually listen to soundtracks throughout the day, but like there's like this metaphorical soundtrack that's always going, and it's like pushing you, and it can make you go down rabbit holes, and it can make you easily distracted because everything is urgent. Like you just keep going and keep going, and it's almost like a funnel that just narrows and narrows and narrows, and it's harder to see outside of it. And for me, it's like meditation, also like getting in the sauna and then like taking a cold shower. Like these are all things that like I have used to create more space. And when I meditate, it's like I think people that have ADHD, I've noticed a strong correlation of all the people I've recommended meditation to, the ones with ADHD have the hardest time
Mm.
because they're needing like that stimulation. And so sitting there and just being with your thoughts and sitting still is very, very hard. Even for like I consider myself probably mostly inattentive as well. And but even for me, I still am just like, okay, what am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? And there are times when like I've been meditating for like a decade now and I'm fairly experienced in it. But there are times even for me, like I will just be like, this is fucking hard. Like it's really hard. And like I just want to get up and do something, and everything feels urgent. But then after like, 10, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, however long I'm doing it, you notice this shift, and then it's almost like you shift into a different gear in a car, and like it's subtle and it's gradual, and then you have things calm down,
Yeah.
and you don't feel that urgency, and you don't feel that rush, you don't feel that need like to do something. And then I come out of it and I'm just like, the soundtrack is either significantly more quiet or it's gone altogether or it's become a completely different song, and like enables me to sit there and be like, okay, what the fuck was I doing? Okay, do I really need to be doing that right now? Probably not. I should probably be doing this other thing instead. And
Yeah.
it just creates that buffer. Is that like how is have you incorporated any meditation or like mindfulness practices?
Um, I've tried meditation. I've struggled to keep doing it. I think that's
Yeah.
mainly probably like a habit forming thing. Um, the thing that I have noticed is one of the keys to energy is actually that rest period. Even if you,
Mm,
whether it's a nap or just like like not having any sounds, so like noise cancelling headphones, that kind of thing. So you don't. I don't think you even need to go to sleep. It's just like if you can have 5-10 minute break without any like stimulation, I've noticed that's like a massive reset, which really helps. Especially at periods where it's not, how can I put it? So they're not normally the most energetic periods. I'm not talking like first thing in the morning and you've got like all the energy for the day, that kind of thing. I'm saying like you could, I feel like the most underrated energy booster is a very short rest.
mm. And what else have you found like um well, we can get to strategies, I guess, but I guess to kind of prime things, it's like, so you've worked with through HYPAA, like a neuroscientist, and going through all this stuff. I'm sure you've done a lot of research on your own as well. So it's just like, how has like your understanding, either talking through him or your own research of like neuroscience, kind of changed your perspective on, I mean, even just personally, like how your brain works, like those moments of just like calming down and just being like, okay, I'm gonna take a break. Doesn't even have to be like a nap. It's just like having that downtime. And for me, it's like the equivalent is like when I start getting really anxious or overwhelmed, I'm like, okay, I need to fucking meditate. That's my equivalent. I'm like, I need to fucking meditate. And um, I've got a bunch of other things like but like how is your understanding of the neuroscience like changed your perspective on things?
Yeah, sure. So I've seen it as an entire, like the day is kind of like an entire cycle or clock rather than and in seven-day chunks rather than seeing it as like a long-term view. So by that, what I mean
Mm,
is that I know that each chunk of the day feeds into the energy of the next one. So I know that if I don't sort my sleep out, that then the next day I will be, you know, like a ping pong between different tasks and I won't be able to focus and do the things I need to do. I know that if I want my best day, that I know exercise works best. And from my own research, I've like uncovered kind of which types of exercises have a higher impact on ADHD symptoms, including like distractibility, impulsivity, inattention. And that those and I think the other thing that I've realized is it's not about like going to the gym and doing like an hour, 2 hours, and then you're absolutely exhausted later on. It's more like which of these exercises then has a positive impact on the key parts of my day that I need to focus better. And then yeah, feeding onto that, I've noticed that the impact of exercise then helps with the choice of foods because you're much more mindful and alert and you're kind of like, oh, actually I can choose what I want rather than being, if you're tired, generally craving like sugar and carbs and everything else. So um and then on top of that, I've kind of noticed that actually when I eat is really really important for when I work. So I've kind of created I guess you could call it like a brain based schedule, so or a brain based workout where it's not just the exercise part. It's like how do you concentrate and focus more, but still live kind of a basically like a balanced life. So you still want to go and do maybe have a pizza in the evening or something like that. It's not all about just kind of like, right, okay, Monday to Friday, I'm going to live like a monk. There are obviously times that you're going to lapse, but my thoughts on it were that if I could improve one or two of these 5 or 10 things that are going to basically improve my attention, then that my lifestyle and my kind of quality of life is going to be like at work, at least, it's going to be significantly better. And so that's how I kind of basically like plan out my day.
Hmm. What with the exercise, like how have you incorporated that into your life and like gotten into the routine? I mean, for me, it's still a struggle. Like it's still a struggle to consistently do it. For me, it's a little bit particularly difficult because of the autoimmune condition. There's like days I wake up and I have like just no energy, like none. And
Yeah.
like I don't get any sleep and it's bad. And like I have to be kind to myself and just be like, okay, I I legitimately don't have the energy to do this. And I know that it's actually going to like hurt me because then I'm going to be like particularly tired. But then that's also an inner struggle because sometimes I'm like, okay, is that an excuse? Or is that like actually the case for me? With the condition. And so it's just like even still, like it's a constant kind of battle. And there are times when I feel physically so bad that I'm just like, okay, this week I'm probably not going to exercise much. Like I just need to rest and recover. And like I wouldn't have done that when I was younger. I would have like pushed myself and then I would have like crashed and then I couldn't do it and then I would feel bad. So I'm trying to like more proactively be like, hey, it's better for you to take the next 2 days off, recover, and then get back on the horse versus pushing yourself, crashing for a week and a half and not being able to do it, and then feeling bad about it and then getting back on the horse. So, like, those are things that I've learned just through sheer iterations and trial and error and a lot of pain, and just, age. But, you know, again, also, it's like, it's a slippery slope where it's like, okay, is that legitimate or is that just an excuse? So that's something I battle with. But
Yeah.
ultimately, it's like I just got to get back on the horse and keep going. So how have you?
So the
What's
way
been
that
your gone?
Yeah, the way that I've done it is I I've got a limited schedule compared to what I used to have, where I had a lot more
Sure.
free time. But uh, basically, I've got an accountability partner that I meet at the gym. Now, it's going to be different for everyone, but I've known him my whole life, and I don't want to let him down by not showing up because that's not who I am. So so
Yeah.
unless I've got like a really good reason, I'm not motivated to go to the gym. I am just doing it purely out of like discipline, as in I know I need to attend the gym X number of days, and when I get there, I'm knackered, and then I need to go on the bike for 5 minutes before I then go and do training, basically. So that's the first thing, and then I think it's also like you say, we all have work and we have other health issues and that kind of thing that can get in the way. So it's really like how many times can you commit to, and then just trying to commit to that many times each week. But I think it's more about habit building. So if you can go on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is when I go, then keep that the same every week because then that's when you're going to be going. Um, but that's kind of really helped me. And then um, in terms of the types of workouts, like if you're purely doing it to get like increased attention and that kind of thing, it's definitely cardio.
Mm.
And yeah, what I created for HYPAA was a ball based workout, which there's some medical research studies that have cited that both martial arts and ball based sports have a positive effect on outer motor skills. And so that's kind of why I was like, well, actually, this would be quite a good thing to create because it's something that I enjoy. So it's like, helps with my dopamine levels, the fact that I love basketball. But and then
Yeah.
on top
Yeah.
of that, this is something that anybody can do with, if they buy a ball off, Amazon or something, and then just can do it at home in the garden, that kind of thing. So yeah, just I think it's got to be the other. So there's accountability and accessibility combined, and the accessibility means it has to be something you can do without equipment. So can you do it at home as well as if you want to choose to do some weightlifting, then obviously you need to join a gym and do that. But I always think those two combined, accessibility and accountability, are key to making sure you're going to get it done each week.
Yeah, for sure. And then like I've never been a big fan of cardio, but I have definitely found that it has helped significantly both with my stress and also like with the ADHD. It's like every single time I get on the treadmill or I do anything like that, like I'm just like, I don't know, afterwards, it's just like a total refresh,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, no, it does have it has a really good impact, and I think also I've noticed it's the first day that you do it in the week that seems like the hardest, and then I find that going back the next day, I've got like a better night's sleep that night, and generally I'm kind of more motivated to do it again the next day.
Yeah, for sure.
Or even if you can like build it into your lifestyle, so if you don't want to go to the gym, you can cycle to work if it's close enough and that kind of thing.
Hmm. How is you worked with a dietitian on hypo? How has that impacted you personally, like with your own eating habits?
Yeah, so I mean, like everybody, I have my bad days, but I think in general, what I've sort of learned from doing that is um, you kind of want more of a protein based lunch type meal for breakfast. And also, and this is just me personally rather than the hyper diet, is I have a very small breakfast because then I'm not using up as much energy in the gut, which is then energy for my brain basically. And then similar like lunchtime, I'm not gonna sort of gorge on carbs and stuff because otherwise I feel like terrible in the afternoon and can't concentrate. And so I basically just switch a lot of my meals around um, to like things like carbs for the evening. One thing I also kind of picked up on is like the accessibility. So the diets that I worked on for hyper are both, if you want to be a bit creative, then and you've got time on your hands, like in the evening, then you should totally go and cook something and go and get all the ingredients and stuff. But if you're in a rush and you're in hyper focus and then you forget to eat, then all of a sudden you haven't got any nutrition to actually sustain the increased power of running your brain basically. So that it's got to be like you always use the egg example. So you can boil the kettle or the hob and put some eggs in there, and then set a timer, and in 10 minutes you've got protein. Or you can potentially try and cook an omelette, realize you haven't got all the ingredients, procrastinate, get disappointed, and then maybe you just give up, and then all of a sudden you haven't got any protein. So which one is more accessible? um,
Yeah.
and the other thing is that a diet doesn't have to be like the whole week. It can be like the days that you want to do it, and then on the weekend, have the stuff that you enjoy.
Yeah, I think Tim Ferriss in the 4 Hour Body, he kind of talks about he's got this slow carb diet, which is like really high in like lentils and stuff like that, like slow kind of carbs, and he's just like he cracks like 3 eggs and puts it in a bowl and then puts it in the microwave for like 30 seconds and then just adds like canned spinach or like lentils and stuff to it and I tried that once and it was horribly disgusting. It was not
You're
good.
not going to go back to it, no.
No, no, but his whole thing was the same thing, like just ease, quickness, whatever. And
Yeah,
I'm just like, dude, just fucking hard boil some eggs for the next like week and just crack those open, like
yeah,
fucking. I mean, but look, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like you're in a fucking. If you're in a, to your point, it's like if you're in a hurry, it's like just find things that are really quick and simple and all the other stuff. Is there any? Is it changed? Not just your eating habits, but what you eat as well.
yeah. I'll be honest, I'm not great on dairy, and I feel that affects my like my gut, and then also makes it harder to sleep, which then, like we were talking
Mm,
about, all the knock-on effects. And so I don't have dairy that often, and I'll like switch to like milk substitutes, like oat milk and that kind of thing.
yeah, I
Um,
like oat
and
milk a lot.
then just trying to think if there's anything else like yeah, I think I pay a lot more attention now to my diet than I previously did. Um, and I'll take like probiotics and that kind of thing because I know that there is, the link between the gut and the brain. So I'm like, oh, actually, like having healthy bacteria and stuff is good for me. what I've kind of like shied away from that I tried like a couple of years ago, and then I was just like, what the hell am I doing? Was I would just try all these different supplements, and then because of my ADHD, I wouldn't like stick with them, or I'd forget one day and stuff. And then I kind of like researched it one day, and it was like, well, you need to be taking this for 2 to 4 weeks to see any impact. And then I was like, yeah, but how does that interact with the other one and everything else? And I was just like, actually, this is not the best way to do this. So now I try and keep it quite simple, and I'll just take
Hmm.
some probiotics with like a good amount of variance, like different strains, and then like just some cod cod liver oil tablets, and then that's kind of it, really.
Mm. Yeah, because I know well, and for people listening, it's like I think it's like 70 or 80% of the serotonin in your brain is like produced in your gut. I mean, it's something like really insane. And like
Yeah,
for me, part of the health issues and the development of the autoimmune condition, it didn't directly cause, but it caused a cascading amount of other issues that ended up leading to my health, my autoimmune condition was the fact that I've probably been on like 30 plus rounds of antibiotics over the course of my life due to all my health issues, which destroyed my gut biome and my gut. It actually really fucked up the lining of my gut. So now I have what's called like leaky gut. And
yeah.
it's that causes a whole cascade of other issues, and it's just a fucking wreck. And so like I have noticed like since my gut biome the last like 2.5 years working with the Cleveland Clinic, like it's gotten a lot better. Like I've noticed that like my a lot of my symptoms with both bipolar and ADHD seem to have gotten a lot better. Um,
That's
so
interesting
I've
you say that, because that one of the things the neuroscientist said was he thinks that healthcare will get much more personalized, whereas at the
mm,
moment in the UK they go, oh, you've got a, I don't know, like a headache, there's a paracetamol, whereas it's like, well, what's actually causing the headache? And it's like, is it stress? Is it anxiety, depression, that kind of thing? Well, maybe here's some of the habits that you need to change instead, you know? So I think, yeah, there's a lot to be said for that, like personalized healthcare. um I don't know, the skeptical side of me still thinks we're in like a lot of like heavy marketing, nice looking landing pages and stuff, and do we actually know that it works? There's not that many studies behind a lot of these personalized healthcare outcomes,
mhm.
and it's more like a nicely marketed product at the moment, but no, I'm sure it will change.
Yeah, no, that's something I want to like circle back on later because I think that's a really big component of all this and like where things are going. Um, one that I've been using, I'm actually using it right now. It's like a wearable and it's called Apollo Neuro. And my doctor at the Cleveland Clinic recommended it. No affiliation with them, but like it's great. It's like this little device and it actually vibrates. It's vibrating right now. My wife says she can hear it. She says it screams at her, and it's like a certain frequency that I guess she can hear. I can't hear it. Most of the other people can't hear it, but your mileage may vary. But it vibrates, and it vibrates on a certain frequency that it actually stimulates your vagus nerve, and it actually like depending on the rhythm and the frequency in which it vibrates, it causes your body to do different things. So they did a clinical study and they found like I think it was like a 70, it's on their landing page. You can check, but anyone listening, but I think it's like 17% increase in deep sleep using it at night. Crazy. Like, and
Wow.
anecdotally it has helped me a lot. But they have ones for focus. They have a mode for focus, and it seems to help. Like it legitimately seems to help. It's not as severe as like I have found with the relaxing part of it and like the sleep. I would say those two are the most. Like I can do it before meditating and during meditation, and it really does seem to make it easier for me to just kind of click into that gear. Um, but I have anecdotally noticed, like since I got this last November during Black Friday, and since then I've seen it seems to have really helped, which is really cool.
Mm.
Um, so that's one. And then like on the supplement things, fish oil, I definitely do. And there's so much research on it being good for ADHD, depression, bipolar disorder. I mean, like there's really no reason unless for some weird reason, like your medical doctor thinks that you should not take it for whatever reason, there's really no reason not to take like a good quality fish oil at this point. Like it's just the research is just so compelling. Um, but some of the other things that have really helped me, some of which like I recommended to you and you tried, so I'm kind of curious to get your thought on it. But there's kind of three things that I think I'd really recommend for somebody with ADHD is L-theanine, L-tyrosine, and Subroxy. And Subroxy is a dopamine reuptake inhibitor, which is kind of Adderall and Ritalin. All those things are both a dopamine kind of releaser and then a reuptake inhibitor. So it actually produces and releases more dopamine, but then it stops the reuptake. So your body kind of using the dopamine that it endogenously like creates. And I would really recommend if you're someone who's like on the fence about ADHD and you are worried and apprehensive about going to get diagnosed and seeing a psychiatrist, or you're somebody like in your case, like where it's like the waiting list is so long. I personally, not medical advice, and not a doctor, don't play one on the internet, but I have recommended to a lot of my friends to try Subroxy because there's really no downsides to it. Like there's no habit forming, there's no real side effects that I've seen on it. But it kind of gives you a flavor of like, does it actually really help with your attention? And I think that would probably be very beneficial if you're kind of on the fence and you want to try something. For me, I'm not. It has completely replaced my need to be on Adderall personally. It's been really cool. L-tyrosine is a precursor to dopamine, so I have found that kind of taking those two together kind of simulates like a natural kind of alternative to like some of the stimulants, and it doesn't have any dependency issues that some of the other medications on. So I mean, there's some really good stuff that you can take outside of just straight pharmaceuticals. But there's other people that I know that they haven't. They've maybe helped a little bit, but it wasn't really enough to move the needle to them. And they could try a Vyvanse or something like that, and it really is a game changer to them. So your mileage may vary, but
Well,
what
yeah,
have
I think.
you seen? Go on.
Oh, what I was going to say is just generally, what I've heard is that of the people who get diagnosed in the UK, it's a roughly like a 50-50 split, and this was from an ADHD sort of foundation, in terms of people who choose to go on medication and people who choose not to. Um, Unfortunately, there's still a stigma around going on medication for ADHD, which I think is terrible because you wouldn't tell a diabetic to not take an EpiPen with them or something because that they shouldn't be doing it or whatever. It's just it seems a little bit kind of I don't know, like if the people who are saying this have ADHD or not, that you shouldn't have
Mm-hmm.
medication. It's yeah, it's very different, and also I think it depends what lifestyle you have and what you have to go through each day. So, if your job and your lifestyle lends itself to you know ADHD, I'll give the actor example is probably an interesting one, then maybe you don't need to go on medication if there's, a serious amount of long periods of focus that you need to, then maybe ADHD medication would help with that. So I don't think I don't think it's like an either or. It's definitely like a personal choice. But I'm still fascinated why people say, that they kind of go, oh, you shouldn't need medication if you've got ADHD. Seems a bit crazy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've kind of gone through a journey with my personal opinion on it. Um, is like I went on it. I was on Adderall for probably like somewhere between like 6 and 8 years. I don't know, somewhere around there. And there's a handful of times I took some breaks, and it it both helped me significantly in the beginning and in the middle, but towards the end, it honestly like significantly hurt my life and myself and my health. But a crucial component to this is that I wasn't aware at the time that I have bipolar disorder.
Right.
And so what it was doing was like triggering my manic cycles. So that would be, I am a unique case. And so, if you have bipolar, disorder, one or two, you probably don't want to go on a stimulant without like seriously, you know, going through the options with your, you know, your doctors, and maybe trying a non-stimulant, like something like a, God, what is it called? Strattera. Like
Yeah,
there are like,
atomoxetine, isn't it? That's the
yeah,
medical
yeah.
name,
So
isn't it?
like that's a non-stimulant based medication that might be better for people with bipolar disorder and stuff like that. And obviously, you know, talk with your psychiatrist and do all that. But um, you know, if that would be the one thing I would say, like if you suspect that you may also, you know, have periods of, you know, hypomania, you know, any of this other stuff, you would seriously talk about those kind of concerns with your psychiatrist before trying an ADHD medication, because that would be my thought, is like trying to treat the bipolar disorder first
Mm.
before the ADHD. Specifically, if you're talking about a stimulant, just because for me, like what it did was it made my manic cycles and my depressive cycles far more intense.
Yep.
And like that could be bad. But there are like concerns that I have about long term use of it. Just because, like for me, it took me like a year afterwards of getting off of it to go back to baseline. But I am not like anti-medication, and I think for a lot of people, like it can be amazing, and it can be the only thing that can really help them if they're treatment resistant to everything else. So, you know,
And
I don't know.
there
I
is
Go on.
a lot. I was going to say a lot of the people who do take ADHD medication take the weekends off. So that
Mm,
kind of proves that you're not, unless you have like dramatic mood changes. Let's just take the Saturday. You take the Saturday and the Sunday off. On the Saturday, if you had dramatic mood changes, then you'd be like, oh, this is I'm getting like a really bad withdrawal symptoms here. But if you can take the weekend off and then go back on it on the Monday, then you know, um, and then also like having like holiday periods off and stuff like that. If you're not working in those periods, I think um,
yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it feels like at the moment that there's a limited number of medications available. So like two stimulant ones in the UK, and then you've got one non-stimulant one, which is the one you just mentioned. How do we know that years from now there won't be like, they kind of see it? The drugs came out in the 90s, and they were like trying to get everyone to take what was it, like oxycontin or something, and it was just like, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
years and years later it was like, oh, this is actually a really bad thing. So
Maybe that wasn't such the best idea.
no.
Yeah.
um
It's
yeah,
going.
no, I was just going to say, I think it's so yeah, I think what would be, I think what isn't talked about enough is the alternative to medication.
Mm,
And so if you wanted to do ADHD the natural, like treatment the natural way, it would be the exercise, change diet, that kind of thing. Now, not everybody is willing to do that. That's the other consideration, and not everybody can do those things. So then it's like, well, medication might be the better option there. But I think actually trying to make lifestyle changes is definitely worth trying. Um, but it does really depend on the habits that you build and how you implement and remind yourself that those are habits and you need to do them.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Kind of taking our own advice about taking downtimes and breaks. Let's pause for a little bit and take a
sounds good.
breather. And we're back. Yeah, so we can like hop into like the business side of things. You and I are both entrepreneurs and have dabbled dabbled in the startup space. You were talking about a little bit earlier about the growth mentor thing. You want to kind of start with that?
Yeah, for sure. So I joined Growth Mentor, I think, off of funnily enough, like a cold LinkedIn outreach in October 18. And yeah, a guy called Foti messaged me, who's the founder. And yeah, they just like, they had like a crazy amount of growth themselves in terms of new mentors on the platform, and like startups, so mentees that were joining. But I really enjoy like mentoring because I do these like half an hour sessions for free, and basically it's fairly like transparent in that people either leave you a good review, no review, or a bad review. And so yeah, like I can't remember the exact number. I think it was around 75 or 76
Damn.
people that I've spoken to, and who have left a review. So I've got a personal goal to reach like 100 people that I've helped, that I can help this year if possible. So get those additional 25. And that, like, as I say, I get like a huge satisfaction out of that. Just being able to give people like tangible things that they can do like straight after the call, rather than like some woolly strategy that is not actually going to give them anything that they can try out or test. um
Hmm.
I think that's what it's about. But I think this whole like democratization of like consulting is like very positive. People being able to do like, so if you just want a Facebook ads expert, or you want um a UX person or a product person, I think that's really, really valuable to be able to do half an hour and just focus on one thing. Yeah, I really like that.
As far as like ADHD, have you noticed any of those traits in a lot of these founders and entrepreneurs that you're talking to?
uh yeah, definitely, yeah. So what do you mean specifically?
Well, like for me, I've been consulting for a very long time, um, and I talk with a lot of young founders, and you can kind of tell right away. Like, there's been some founders where you talk with them and they got this idea, and then they're pivoting, like they're pivoting all the time, they're changing things, and I'm like, why are you doing all that? Like, why are you working on this? Why are you working on
Yeah.
that? And like a lot of times they give me reasons, but they just hop skipping between like all these different things. And I notice, I mean, talked about earlier, I notice those same traits of myself.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
I can see that they often have problems with prioritization, delegation, time management, a lot of these things. And, um, perfectionism is something that I think is very rampant in like people with ADHD. And I think it's like a coping mechanism for it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a way of justifying like why you can't finish something.
Mm.
And I'm speaking from my own experience, but it's like I would just be like, oh, okay, well, this isn't ready yet, or I'm not feeling like the motivation to finish this, and like I need it to like come from like a source of passion and like drive. And if I'm not feeling it, then I don't want to force it because I don't want it to like feel sterile or whatever. It's just like all that was wrong. All that was just like giving myself excuses, and I see that a lot with some of these founders and stuff. So I mean, there's a lot of different traits that you can kind of tell. You can kind of see from the outside.
I think what we're going to see a lot more of is whether it's like entrepreneurs with ADHD or employees or freelancers with ADHD, is either software or people to help with accountability. And I think
Hmm.
um, with ADHD, people don't want to generally, like, adults with ADHD aren't going to do the task that is super boring, the accounts, the building a spreadsheet, that kind of thing, because it's just not interesting to them. And so it'll
Hmm.
be put off until they end up just not doing it, or it becomes an issue. And I think that if you're an entrepreneur with ADHD, the first thing you need to do is probably find the opposite of you. So I'm not saying that all on all ADHD entrepreneurs are not operators, because that's not the case. There are some ADHD really talented operators, but I'm saying the bit that you're not good at, you should probably try and source that as either a paid assistant or a co-founder, because I think it's going to be really, really hard and increase the likelihood of it not working out.
Hmm. 100%. I totally agree. I mean, like when I had my agency, like the title that I had was like COO, and it's just like that is not like what I would ever think then, like previous to that, then or even now would be a good title for me. But really, it was just because I was the only person that really understood the technical side of things. So like
Yeah.
I was, so it's just like it kind of defaulted to me to come up with the systems, come up with the strategy, and whatever else, because everybody else on my team was sales based,
Yeah.
or sales or sorry, design based. My partner was much more sales and like social media, and then my other partner was design. He was amazing creative director, great designer. And then everybody else was under me as far as, web dev, marketing, all the other stuff. So it's just like it kind of defaulted to me to be the person to set up the operations and the setup and oversee all that. But that was what caused a lot of friction because it there wasn't anybody else to handle the nuts and bolts of like just project management and everything else. Like it kind of and it was difficult because like that's not something that like I have gotten really good at project management, but that's through, so many years of trial and error. Like that's not natural for me at all.
No, there's things that just don't come easy to you, but then you're like, oh, actually, this needs to be done. So you like figure it out.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's yeah, that's definitely the case. What skills do you think entrepreneurs with ADHD should learn, despite the fact they might not want to?
That's a great question. I don't know. I'm really curious to get your take on that, but um I think the thing that comes to mind is the delegation. I think is a part of it that I've been really really bad at, and I'm not sure how much like that is ADHD thing or not. I think the procrastination and the constantly putting off things that are difficult or I don't know how to deal with in the moment is something that is really, really difficult because, like, I will work on something and be super into it and go down that rabbit hole and just be hyper focused on it and have all this energy for it. And that there's a lot of like huge benefits to that with being an entrepreneur and like getting that excitement and going down that rabbit hole and just having almost like this like almost manicness. um and I have that because I'm bipolar, but I've seen that in so many other ADHD entrepreneurs, and it might not be as extreme or as it might be take on a different flavor for me, but I see it constantly in other people that have ADHD that are entrepreneurs, and I think that's amazing. I think you kind of need that. Otherwise, like starting a business or anything is so fucking hard, and if you're not
Yeah,
passionate about it, then that can be really difficult, and you might just not have the energy to go from 0 to 1. So I think in that regard, like being a serial entrepreneur can come really natural to people with ADHD. But I think the problem also is like that last 20% is like 80% of the effort, and I think that's something
mm,
that I've been really bad at historically. And I think I've had to manage that. I think just the biggest one is just time management. I think that's the biggest thing. And like really getting better about getting on a schedule and looking at things as like a series of sprints, but actually accounting for that, like actually planning that rather than just winging it. I'm in a weird spot where like I don't have a schedule, like a fixed schedule. I make up my own hours. I pick consulting gigs and working with people that I want and when I want. But I'm in a very privileged position in my career and my life where I can do that. So I optimize a little bit for having flexibility in my life. But when I kind of crank things up again, as far as like trying to really accomplish a lot more things right now, I'm kind of personally just focusing on my health and a lot of other things and balance and all that stuff. But, over the next 5 years, when I start ramping things up, I think the biggest thing I'm going to focus on is, uh, structuring my time so that, and planning for things and scheduling things out much more rigidly so that I can ensure that I'm getting everything done. And I think the problem for me is like I will hyper get things done when I'm passionate about it, but then when I won't, they'll just drag. And you can't make
mm,
progress that way. You just can't make it. And I think when you're younger and you don't have as much responsibility and you don't have as many things that you're juggling, it's easier to do that. But you experience it. You're married now. You got a house. You got a daughter now. It's like you got all this other stuff. It's like you have to be much more rigid with your time. Otherwise, like you just can't juggle it all. You know. So I mean,
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
those are some of the big things I would do, and I would say like overall, just the biggest fucking thing I think overall that's a little bit more tangible is just like not abusing caffeine, like
Right.
really being mindful. Like I drink decaf coffee now. I am really, really mindful of my caffeine intake because I was self-medicating with for that for so long, but it has a lot of negative aspects like sleep, my anxiety, my blood pressure, like everything. And like I found that and I kind of want to talk about this here in a bit, is like the whole Wolf of Wall Street, like just being super hypermanic and just like working on things and all this other stuff. It's like caffeine can do that, and it can narrow your focus and get you like down it can take the hyper focus that you have and just increase like almost like jet fuel for it. And I can find that it makes it harder to slow down and the pause and to reground yourself, like you're talking about earlier, like taking that break. It can be very hard when you're like super amped up on caffeine. So I
Mm.
think that's just high level. That's some of my takes. What about you?
Um, I think the one that I brought up earlier is probably underestimated but really important is the accountability factor.
Hmm.
So with ADHD, you're going to want to do everything, and you might get nothing done as a result. And so having that accountability partner, whether that's somebody who is like in your business, it's a virtual assistant, or it's like an app, basically making sure you get like those three things done, and being like kind to yourself that you've got those three things done and not that you needed to blast through like a massive to-do list.
Hmm.
um and then what else? I think the prioritization is key, but that's probably part of that. So making sure you're accountable to get it done and having some kind of consequences if you don't get it done, and then realizing what you like, and realizing that you will probably do the thing in front of you rather than prioritizing to do the thing that actually needs to be done. Um, and I think as part of that, it's also realizing that whatever you start is probably the thing that you're going to then carry on doing. So you're actually better off doing like something that's much more bigger that needs to get done, that you can hyper focus in, rather than doing the opposite of that, which is like eat the frog, do like the small thing to get started. So being able to differentiate with like how you actually work, I think is really key initially. And then I would, going back to that, it's like which hours. So it can't be all the hours. It's like which hours are you best at? So then you kind of pick when it is that you're going to do the chores, the washing kind of thing, like when you're maybe a little bit more tired, and it doesn't matter, versus if you've got like a really important piece of content to write, a proposal, recording a podcast, like picking those at when you're going to be at your best, I think is key, and really like managing your schedule around that. So if you know you're best at doing your work in the morning, don't schedule all your meetings in the morning, put them in the afternoon. But equally, you're going to need some energy to go through those meetings. So making sure you rest in between those. So it's like, I think those three things, isn't it? It's like accountability, um, like scheduling, or managing when you're going to be your best. And I've forgotten what the third one was. um, but yeah, so I think just like work. I just think being self-aware is really important.
Hmm. For sure. And like one of the things that like accountability, it just came to mind was I think it's called Focus Mate. And there's a couple
Oh
other
yeah,
ones that are like that. Yeah, like this virtual co-working space. So people aren't aware is like you go on there and it matches you with somebody else and literally you just co-work together. Like you just sit there and you're like,
body
hey, I'm such
doubling.
and
Yeah,
such, and then like today I want to try and accomplish this thing, and then they're like, oh, okay, I'm such and such, and I want to accomplish this thing, and then you just sit there and just like work together, and like that's really fascinating for me. I don't know how much that would help me personally. I guess I should probably try it at some point, but couple of my friends that have ADHD, like Zaid Hisham, who I've had on the podcast, and I'm about to release an episode here shortly, actually, with him. He mentioned, he might have actually mentioned it on the podcast. I don't know. We recorded it like a week or so ago, but yeah, he said it's helped him a lot, and so it's really really interesting. Like just the accountability. I love working at coffee shops. Like
Yeah.
I have considered, getting an actual office to not. I mean, I have a home office. I have this whole second story here. I've got this office and then like a room out there, and it's all just kind of like my floor for having an office space. But I've considered having a separate place that I go to just because just the not being home. Like that's the other thing
Yeah.
is like being home. It's like, okay, I'm going downstairs and going to the bathroom. Hey, the dog needs to go out. Hey, I need to feed the dog. Hey, okay, I should probably put a load of laundry in while I'm doing all these other things. And like all this shit just accumulates and it takes you out. Whereas if you go into an
Oh, that's
office, go on.
there's like a name for that, isn't it? Was it cascading and flow? There's do you know what's his name? Who's the guy in Breaking Bad where he goes and he's what's the TV show he's in? How? You heard of that?
No.
Um so he's oh man, basically
What character in Breaking Bad is he?
no, he's the main. So Brian
Oh, Bryan
Brian
Cranston?
Cranston.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when he's Hal, is that in
Oh, that's
Malcolm in
Malcolm
the
in the
Middle?
Middle. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
basically, there's this scene. You can go on YouTube and find it, and he's basically like going in to get something from the garage, and then he ends up like fixing a drawer and getting something else, and it's all like this cascading and flow where he goes off and does different things. And basically, like the way I describe it on the HYPAA website, I've got a bit on there of like what is ADHD, and it's like the branches of the tree and how you kind of start growing one, and then you go to another, and then you go to and then you can't remember like what the root was, the
Mm-hmm.
initial thought. And so, if you can minimize those, then you're more likely to get done what it is that you need to get done.
Yeah.
And so, I think with that, it's both visual and auditory. You need to block out the sound and be focused on the thing in front of you.
Yeah.
And you can't, and it's hard to do that when you're at home, isn't it?
It is because you just got all this
Yeah,
external stimulation and you just see all the shit that needs to get done. And then you
yeah,
think, oh, okay, well, it's not going to take that much longer just to like do that. Like, for example, put the laundry in. It doesn't seem like a big deal because you're like, okay, I'm going to go
yeah,
downstairs. I'm going to prep the laundry. It takes me 5 minutes and then it's in there for the next hours too. And then when I take another break, I'll take it out and put it in the dryer. Not a big deal. But then it's just like it's not just that. Other things accumulate, and then there is the God, what is it called? There is a sort of loss of productivity when you do zone switching. I think it's called. I forget what the researcher or scientist, but he goes on podcasts a lot, and he talks about like when you change from one task to another, there's a
yeah.
cost, and you're actually losing like the momentum that you had, and it's wearing you down. It actually burns calories. Like it actually is tiring to you. So I have
Yeah,
to think
task switching.
task
Yeah,
switching. That's what it is. Yeah, yeah. So and that's something that like I've had to be mindful of, and it can be kind of stressful at first because you're just like, okay, well, I need to complete this task, and then you think about the cost of the task switching, and then you're like, okay, I want to keep doing this, and like it can actually, when I first started doing it, it was actually kind of stressful for me because then I was just like overthinking it and feeling bad when I would change a task. But um, the thing about the co-working that I find interesting is like when you go to a coffee shop, for example, and when I travel, I love working from coffee shops because I have this distance. And it's interesting because when you're there, it's like all you're really there to do is to work, but there's all this external noise and things happening outside as well that it's almost so overwhelming that it's calming, and that like it's almost like white noise. It just causes you just to focus on what you're doing. And there's also that outside accountability where it's just like, I'm here to work. Do I really want somebody walking by and seeing them on like Reddit, like, so it's just like, I don't care about that much, but still it's just like, it just keeps me accountable and it keeps me narrowly focused on work. So I prefer that than having like a separate office. I actually get a lot more done at a coffee shop than I do anywhere else. Is that the same for you? Or is it different?
It's probably different. I just get distracted by
Mm,
external noises quite easily. So then when I go to the office, I'll put on some noise cancelling headphones, and then I'll just make sure I'm like as far away from other people as possible
I
if I
love.
can. Like as in I'm still social and I'll say like if someone comes in, I'll be like, "Oh, good morning," or how are you? But really I'm trying to just be like in the zone. And I think it's mainly because I'm like, well, I've only got these hours to get this work done, and
Mm,
then I've got to get back home for my family. So it's like I'm not I haven't just got infinite hours to then do the work.
hmm.
I think actually that's like one of the turning points for some adults with ADHD, realizing they can't just put in more hours to do the work and to procrastinate when they get a family, because then it's like, oh, you've got a set point that you've got to get back for, set time.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
You were talking about earlier about like just like it's hard to kind of like circle back to what you were previously doing because like you just get distracted on this rabbit hole like that scene with Hal and Malcolm in the Middle. Like I remember seeing that on Reddit, and I think it's like he has to change a light bulb or something, and then he goes into the garage to see it, and then like this like he opens the door and it's squeaky, so then he goes to get WD-40, and then like it just becomes this cascading thing. And on Reddit, so I think the top comment was like, "Oh shit, that's what ADHD is like. Maybe I have it," you know. But like, doing this podcast, there's so many times I'm listening back and I'm like, fuck, man. Like, I started saying one thing, but that was like really interesting that we were talking about, but then I got distracted and like, that is it. Like it's just constantly being like, it's almost like having all these different tabs open on a browser. And like, sometimes you're on a tab and then sometimes you go back to it. Other times you forget, you see there's 50 tabs open and you completely lost whatever the hell you were working on. Um, and that can be an amazing skill. Like I think it's amazing for doing the podcast because it makes us go down rabbit holes that we wouldn't expect, and I think that can be fantastic and it keeps you loose on your feet. But also if you're running a business, it can go back to that thing I was talking about where you're just like, where the fuck did my day go? I didn't accomplish any of the
yeah.
stuff that I wanted. Has there been any strategies that you found for yourself as like
Uh,
circling back or keeping yourself on task?
I think it probably goes back to the accountability. Like if you've got somebody else going, have you got this done yet? And
Yeah.
then probably one of the best ones is like time boxing. So actually
Mm,
putting like a calendar invite for you specifically to do that work and nothing else. If you have any like writing to do or reading, then I don't use like an internet connected device now. I've got a tablet called Remarkable, and basically that I can write
remarkable.
notes on that so that I can't actually then go and do something else basically. So yeah,
Huh.
I normally use that if I'm on like a Zoom call, or so I'm in a meeting, or I'm kind of if I'm watching a video and then I want to take notes, so I'm like learning about something. I find that writing it down is incredibly useful, and I kind of moved from pen and paper to that because I was like, well, actually, this is documentable because you can convert it into text and that kind of thing.
That's pretty cool. I'm looking at it right now. It's kind of like yeah, it's like a little notepad that's like digital with like e-ink and stuff like that. But it also has and there's a bunch of those, but this one has like a keyboard that's like kind of like
Yeah,
comes
it's
out.
and the embarrassing thing is that it can't detect my handwriting, so I definitely need to work on that
Dude,
because my
same.
handwriting's shocking.
It's so bad. I had to fill out like
uh,
an insurance like reimbursement form for like getting some of my meds covered, and like they have a piece of paper, and they've got the little tiny for every single letter. There's like a box. So like
yeah,
I have to cram like capital H, capital I, and I'm sitting here looking. And I'm like I look like a toddler. I'm like worried because I have to like scan it and then have like my doctor sign it and then scan it and then send it back to me and then I have to like do a thing and I'm like worried that like through all the scannings like if they're even going to be legible at the end because my handwriting is so fucking bad. But um yeah,
well,
yeah.
that would solve that problem for you. You can just put the what is it, like the PDF into it and then sign it, and
Oh,
then
that's
it's
like way
done.
better. I wish.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That um what one of the things that like I've thought about is like the inconsistency. So like we're talking about like just even like time management and all the other stuff, but like you go through those periods where you're like hyper focused and you have all this energy, and then you have low periods where you kind of need to recover and recharge. Um, that
Yeah.
people with ADHD tend to not be super consistent. I mean, they're consistent in inconsistency, but like in general, like you're not that even keel level, like, kind of, when it comes to productivity that some people are, like that COO type of person, that, like the Tim Cook of the world. How do you ensure that like your business doesn't suffer, or how do you like compensate for that as a working professional, and kind of knowing that you're going to have those down periods where maybe you're not as productive?
Yeah, I think it depends like what point of the business it is, whether it's completely from scratch or whether it's like a growing company.
Mm-hmm.
I think yeah, there's you're always going to have like down days where you're not that productive, but I do think it's about getting the processes in place from like a very early stage, which is why I was like saying about that, having that integrator or that assistant role, and then having an idea of like we need to write SOPs for this so that we can standard operating procedures, so then we can get somebody to do it, whose time is worth less than yours, and like doing that from the start, and then just really, I think the biggest thing that we talked about earlier was like working on like stuff that really doesn't matter because it's in front of you versus working on stuff that really does matter that's going to like move the needle. So um, I think with you and I, it might be like some high level biz dev stuff where we're like, oh, actually, if we attended this event or we, got an introduction to this person, um, that is where we need to be spending our time rather than building like, I don't know, an email spreadsheet for cold email or something. You know what I mean? It's just kind of, you don't really want to be doing those type of tasks that are um, important and need to be done, but they need to be you basically need to put some kind of system in place to make sure they're done. Um, and then I guess it's really difficult at the beginning where you don't have the funds or the resources to do that, and it's just a case of like you kind of have to do some of that just to get it done, but realize that maybe you won't put the same amount of effort into as somebody who was doing that for their like full-time job.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult. I don't think there's really an answer for it.
Yeah. What about like burnout? Because like that's something that I've struggled with and still do,
Yeah.
frankly, because I just get so excited on a rabbit hole, and I get so excited on one thing, but then I just find myself either burnt out physically and emotionally, or burnt out on the topic or subject itself. And like I need a break from it, and it's really been a struggle. And it physically, I mean, honestly, the burnout and the stress of it has been one of the biggest contributing factors in my autoimmune condition. And so again, didn't cause it, but it was a significant factor in the cascading kind of effects that led to it. And
Hmm.
it's crazy how many entrepreneurs I know have developed autoimmune conditions. It's really, really rampant. Those are topics that like I increasingly want to like kind of cover on the show and interview, some experts on it. But it's pretty nuts. And I think that like burnout is something that almost every entrepreneur at some point like experiences, but we don't really talk about it a lot. It seems like it's changing in the last couple of years. It seems like the kind of the we're talking a lot more about mental health. We're talking a lot more about burnout. I think burnout is the easiest entry point for working professionals to talk about mental health, because it's something that like everyone has experienced, whether you're kind of neurodivergent or neurotypical, like everyone has experienced burnout at some point. If you've been working professionally more than 5 years, you've experienced it. Um and and it's understandable, but it's I don't know, like it seems to me that people with ADHD tend to be a little bit more susceptible to it than others. Like, have you? I guess what's been your journey with burnout, and is there anything in like your research that you found that kind of talks about it?
So yeah, I think my journey with burnout was just, I think if I've been in a kind of a sprint and I really wanted to get stuff done, then generally that's led to burnout.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other thing is that I don't know that I've led to burnout until I've had some time off and then I've just got sick. That kind of gives me a good indication that I'm burnt out because I've just got sick straight afterwards. But my body's just been kind of like, well, we've got to keep going, haven't we? Um, but yeah, I don't. It's, I think it really. I think what it comes down to is like the lifestyle around it. So it's like instead of being productive is not doing 20 tasks, it's doing three really important tasks and then getting to the stuff that you need to do on a day-to-day basis, but maybe isn't as important. I think
Yeah.
this is the problem is like productivity culture around like you just have to do more hours and get more done. And then it's like, well, actually, I'm just I'm not really moving the needle here. You know, I could do 56 hours a day and it's if there was more hours in the day and it still wouldn't make a difference.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think that's what it comes down to is having those like healthy sleep habits and then having the exercise habits as well that will then give you more energy to go to do the things that you need to do effectively. And then I think it's the same as what I said earlier in terms of you need to be able to outsource or delegate those things that it just aren't really like you shouldn't be doing them because they're not high value tasks.
Yeah. How do you, how have you historically kind of navigated what to even work on? And I don't necessarily mean that like fractional day to day. I just mean overall. Like one of the things that I see consistently, I mean, this is just across the board with young people, but particularly like young people that somewhere are on, like the ADHD spectrum that I've seen is they just have decision paralysis. They don't know what they want to do with their life, like because
Mm.
you have so many interests. For me, when I was younger, the first thing I wanted to do was be a veterinarian because I loved animals. I grew up in the rural side of town. We had every single kind of fucking animal over the years imaginable, from shit tons of dogs and cats to rabbits, chinchillas, a ferret. I mean, like just all kinds of stuff. Like I just had so much stuff growing up, and lots of fish too, like lots of fish. And so like I love the animals and I wanted to do that. And then, as I got older and realized the the reality of being a vet is just not like hanging out with animals all day like Ace Ventura. Like
Yeah,
it can be very brutal. And there was a lot of death growing up because, again, lots of animals, lots of death. And I'm just like, this is kind of a buzzkill. I don't really think I want to do this. But then I wanted to be
yeah,
I wanted to be a filmmaker and a designer, and there's all these different things that I wanted to do, and it just kind of life kind of happened. I ended up going down and having an agency, and then the whole thing just kind of went from there. But so for me, it's like I didn't know what I wanted to do for a long time, and then it just kind of life, just this trajectory, just kind of took me there. And after I left the agency, it took me like the 2 years to kind of figure out what I wanted to do, and the whole series of split tests, like I've really now have like I know what I want to work on, like the podcast, all this other stuff. Like I have all these other larger goals that I want to work on, and I have an idea of the constellation, but how I'm going to get there, I don't really know yet. Like I have a plan, but who knows if I'm going to stick to that, because like everything about me is about just taking split testing and trying things and going whatever. But that would have made me anxious when I was younger. Like my like 21-year-old self would have just been like, I don't know, like I there's all these things I want to do. How do I know if that's the thing that I want to do? And there's a lot of people that I've talked to that are late teens, early 20s, and they just have total fucking decision paralysis. And often they go to college and they're not even sure what they're going for, like is what they want to do. Like sometimes they just pick shit just because they don't know what they want to do, and at least it's something, or their parents are pressuring them or whatever. And I feel like as a society in general, we kind of pressure people to go down one track. And I feel like
Oh
people with
yeah, we do. And
ADHD, yeah, like there's all these things they want to do. So it's like, how do you decide?
yeah, it's I don't know if I did it the right way either, because I just tried lots of different things and saw which one stuck basically. I
Mm,
think also you and I were in a time when this kind of digital revolution came, and we just happened to be in the right place at the right time.
for sure.
Um, and I think my like first job out of university was like working in telecoms, and everybody was like these sales guys, they were like 15 years older than me. I was like, oh, I think I'm in the wrong industry because it's all dictated with, like another 15 years ahead. So then I was like, oh, actually, like online looks really interesting, and it was like fast growing, and that was probably the best thing I ever did in terms of not just work wise, but like friends that I met and general. It was a good move to move into that industry. It didn't need specific qualifications, so I think this is the first thing, isn't it? Evaluate. One thing I always looked at is when I was at university, I did a part-time job at a hospital, a mental health hospital, and I noticed that the nurses were trying to train in something else, so they were trying to get out. So that's never a good sign when somebody's trying to leave and do something else. And I saw
Yeah.
that more than a few times, and then I was like, oh, okay, so maybe this is not something I'll get into, but I respect the people that do it, and I think it's an incredibly hard job to do. And then the other thing is like, what is the barrier to entry? Like, so if you become a lawyer, a doctor, anything like that, you're looking, or like an architect, you're looking at like what, 6 years in some cases. And so that is a long time, especially if you've got ADHD, to get bored and then go, actually halfway through this, not for me. So I think it has to be something that you can like self learn to a point before you need some guidance, and then just test out basically. I think that's got to be the key, isn't it? It's got to be accessible to learn, to get your foot in the door basically.
Have you felt that feeling of just like you have that aha moment where you're like, oh shit, this is what I should be doing right now, or like was it an actual like very compelling feeling? Because for me, I've had that. Like sometimes it's just like like you're saying, like you try something and you're like, this is not really working. Okay, I'm gonna try this other thing instead. It's just kind of a natural flow. And there's other times when you're just like, you have this like aha moment. It's almost like the fire of the gods comes down, and you're just like, oh shit, okay, this is what I need to do. This is it. And like that's powerful when you have that. But sometimes you don't have that experience. But have you?
Yeah, well, there's several factors, isn't there? You could be right job, wrong industry, or you could
Mm,
be like right company, wrong job. I've had that a few times. Or you could be, I absolutely love doing this, and then it makes no money. So there's like all those different factors, and it's like marrying them all up together to make sure that you can find something that you can make a living out of and still enjoy, basically. Also think there's another factor where you might be doing a job or a business, and there'll be like one or two parts of it that you absolutely love. So for me, I hosted an event the other day, like at London Zoo, and I absolutely loved doing the voice of God, where I had to like introduce and announce people, and then go on stage and that kind of thing, and like ask the questions. I thought that was like very me. But then I've got to do other stuff which is like admin based for marketing. Find it incredibly boring. So it's like those. Is what you're doing like? Is there a path to somewhere else, or is it basically like the amount of things that you enjoy in that are just so small that that you probably won't last that long at it?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What's happened when you found yourself at that like kind of like dead end? Like, what was your what was your reaction to it? Because like I found myself like with the agency, that was a dead end for sure. Like I remember I was just burnt out, and now I know all the reasons why I was burnt out, and I think there's ways looking back that I could have made things work a lot better. Definitely could have worked a lot better. I still think leaving was the right call for me for a lot of different reasons. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I needed a change. And so like I just kind of took a break away from things and then took a step back and was just like, wow, okay, this is not working. I know what I don't want, so I'm just gonna leave and then trust that I'll figure out what I want to do, next. But then there's been other times when I mean, COVID was probably the best example of this, where it's just like shit is landing, like bombs are going off all around you, and you got landmines all over the place, like bombs are going off. You got to navigate all that shit and then come up with a backup plan like ASAP. Like you don't have time, like our entire industry was changing rapidly, and like,
Mm.
so it's just like, being self-employed during that time was intense, lost a lot of
Yeah, definitely.
contracts. Like everyone was certain. No one was wanting to hire. It was crazy. So it's just like, you got to rapidly change and like, pivot. How has that been for you? Like the embracing change and navigating it, I guess.
Yeah, I think I've kind of always like when I've sort of sidestepped or moved to like a new industry, like I've always kind of thought, well, actually, this is not the end of the world, and I'm fairly quick at picking things up. So as long as as long as there's something new to learn, then I'm kind of like, oh, actually, this is quite interesting. And then there will always be bits that I don't know, but I guess I'm just one of these people that I don't really worry about those like little parts because I think, oh, actually, in the grand scheme of things, that's something that I'll pick up. So that's kind of how I approach it. Um, and then, yeah, I think I always go back to my network. It's like if you don't build like a valuable network of people that you can talk to about these problems and make who are creative and suggest solutions, then you'll probably you probably need to look at who your network is, as in
Yeah.
but you want to be that person as well, helping them when they come to you and they've got a challenge or a problem or they're looking at going through a transition. I think it's like that's the key, is having those people around you or seeking those people out to meet them.
Yeah. What's it been like for you? Like you mentioned earlier, like shrinking social circle, and I'm definitely experiencing that. Like I'm someone, similar to you, that you used to have such a fucking vast network. Like particularly here in
Mm.
Dayton, like I knew everybody, and like that wasn't hard because you had the downtown scene, and again, small mid-sized city. Lot people that, particularly like a decade ago when I was super active in that, it was one of those things where like downtown scene wasn't as popping as it is now. So like the people that were down there was like a certain circle, and like they were down there a lot, both professionally and then in the music space, creative space, all this stuff. And like I was kind of at the intersection of a lot of those. Like some of my best friends were really active in the music scene and ran a lot of those circles, and the business community for sure, and all this other stuff. So it's just like, it got to the point where you'd be downtown and you'd walk in anywhere and you know at least two or three people, you constantly everywhere you went. I used to have like such a diverse social circle, and professionally, like I still have a really big network, but I don't network as much as I used to. I'm not on Lunch Club. Like that's how you and I met, right? Lunch Club.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was thinking the same thing. I was actually chatting about this with somebody in the office earlier, and I was saying that in networks, especially on new platforms like Lunch Club or any new sort of platform, I would say the quality of the participants goes down or it doesn't necessarily go down. It changes over time, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
you might be the same as me in that you probably haven't been on it because you're like, oh, I'm not meeting the same type of people. I'm not meeting like-minded people, that kind of thing. And so you're going to look elsewhere, aren't you?
Yeah.
But also maybe you are in a sort of season or period of your life where you're like, actually, I don't really need to meet people at the moment because I've got a different objective, that kind of thing. I think you can always revisit it, and I think things come in cycles, and you'll bump into people that you work with in a previous life and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
For sure.
but for me, it's just unnoticed from a friendship point of view when I moved back to where I am now on the coast, is that I gravitated towards a bunch of other self-employed. Most of them are neurodiverse, not all of them, but you can kind of the ones that haven't been diagnosed, you can kind of like get a feel for whether that they could be or not, in some way or another. So I feel like, yeah, I've sort of gravitated towards a smaller number of people now. Now I'm not sort of in the capital city.
Yeah, it's so funny looking at my social circle. Like, um, almost everybody is somewhere either neurodiverse, like they're either ADHD, somewhere on the autistic spectrum. They're most of them in my personal life somewhere on the LGBTQ spectrum. Like, it's just like I just have this band of weirdos that like like that I'm constantly around, and then it's just it's interesting when I'm around like neurotypical people, and I'm just like it's yeah, I don't know. Like it's the exception to the rule in my life, or it's just really interesting. But how have you personally been processing it? Because for me, it's like I wonder. It's like I go back and forth. It's like, am I missing something? Am I losing something? Like I don't really have. It's a, I mean, I do have a desire to meet new people and network. Like, I mean, that's one of the. I kind of get to scratch that itch, both with the podcast, but also like um, just networking for business in general. So like I get a lot of referrals too. So
Mm.
that's how I meet a lot. I mean, like you introduced me, I think to Candace, and then Candace introduced me to like some of these other people, and like it's just like, I have introduced you to a bunch of people. You've introduced me to a bunch of people. So it's just like I a lot of my networking now comes from just friends being like, you need to talk with this person. Um, and like to your point on the lunch club thing, it's like I've actually thought about going back on there a couple times now, and even when I mentioned it, I'm like, maybe I should go back on there and try that again. But I'm just like, really, it's like the quality of it definitely has like gone downhill. Just noticing like I have not admittedly like used it in like maybe like 2 years, year and a half, something like that. But when I was using it pretty actively for a year, like the quality was amazing. And then I started noticing that like a lot of people were just trying to pitch me stuff, and there was a lot more salespeople, and like the word got out. And I've noticed that on the podcast networking apps too, like trying to find guests and stuff. Like it used to be people that were other podcasters, or like they're an author or a speaker, and like they want to try and get on stuff. There's a lot more people that are clearly just doing it for sales and only for sales, and like they don't have anything interesting to say. So it's like it's not like, I mean, if you're doing it for sale, I totally get it, but a lot of these people are just like, you know I don't know. But like I've thought about like, am I missing something? Am I losing something? And
Mm.
I'm not. I don't know. I go back and forth on that. Like in the last couple of years, like there's been some really serious friendships that like they're no longer in my life anymore. And a couple of them like I thought about like reaching back out to and reconnecting with, and I'm just like, no, I really love them and they're a good person, but they're kind of dramatic, and like it's just kind of adding. It's one of those things where you start to think about like, okay, the last 5 times I saw this person, how did I come away from it? Like, was I drained or did I get more energy out of it? And like, even though they're a good person, it's fucking draining being around them more than it's a benefit. And it's a weird space where like my social circle is definitely getting smaller in that regard, but I think I'm okay with it, but I do
Yeah.
question, like, am I losing something? Like, have you been going through that?
Um, I mean, I used to definitely be a lot more outwardly social, like making friends, that kind of thing. And I've probably stopped that just because I've run out of time.
Yeah,
In terms
yeah,
of like we made a few new friends since we moved back, and yeah, like my other half was just like, we don't have any more free time to go to people's weddings.
yeah,
So it was kind of like a running joke, but she was also like, oh, I know if we were to move to a new city, like the sort of person you are, Mark, within a couple of months, we'd be like invited to stuff and meeting new people and that kind of stuff.
yeah,
So it's good in that respect, but it's also like, well, you've only got so much free time, haven't you? And um, it, how do you want to spend that? I think the other thing is what are you looking to get out of the relationship in some respects? So if it's a professional relationship, it's obviously like working partnerships are good and that kind of thing. But how often are you interacting with that person? It's all of those kind of questions. It's very, I think, yeah, professionally networking very, very different to friendships. I think mainly, I think because it's like a lot of my friends do completely different jobs from me, so I'm not just hanging out with other marketers, right? So I'm genuinely curious about what it is that they do and how that's different, because I don't really want to hear about what I do because I've been doing it all day,
Yeah.
So there is that, isn't there? Don't get me wrong, like I do want to chat about it with colleagues and that kind of thing, but at work, whereas like when I finish work, I'm like, do I really want to go to another networking and talk about like the latest WordPress theme or something? I'm not that interested in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't. That's why I'm kind of personally moving away from e-commerce and all that stuff and going into a different direction because I'm just like it just doesn't interest me as much anymore as it used to. It's just like I don't. Hey, the new latest Google update. I'm like I'm an SEO. It's my background. I'm just like I don't really care anymore. I don't really
Yeah.
care. It's just like it's Google's gonna do what Google's gonna do. Do I really want to sit here and read all the technical SEO updates of the last 6 months? It's like not really, not really. I'd rather just like consult with my dude Everett or somebody else that I know and be like, hey, what's going on? Like, I don't want to deal with this shit. But yeah, I don't know, man. It has been one of those things where me and my partner are polyamorous. Like we could date other people and like and both of us are just like, man, we're too tired. We don't have the energy for that right now. There's just too
Yeah.
much other shit to fucking do. Meet new people and go through all that stuff and juggle all that. And it's like, not to say we won't do that in the future. I'm absolutely sure we will, but it's just like right now in this season of our life, it just doesn't really make sense. And so like that's been just one of the things that I've been processing. It's just been kind of heavy on me, just thinking like, okay, I'm I think I'm okay with this, but like I don't know, like really sitting there and kind of processing all of it. Like you were talking about the movie with Bill Burr and Chappelle, like old dads. It's just like we're reaching that. I mean, you are a dad now, and like everybody in my life jokingly calls me dad because I kind of take on that like father role most of the time. People in my life, so it's just like you've got that kind of thing where I don't know, you're going to that next season of your life and you're just kind of like watching it and wondering like for me I've always looked at it as like finality or like not having options, like seeing my options close like would always make me really nervous. And I didn't like that. Like I'm a novelty addict. Like if you take any of the personality tests, like novelty, like I'm always at the very end, like the most extreme. And like so
I
it's
see.
yeah, so it's just like I love new things and learning new things and going to new places and all that stuff. So like the thought of like closing down options is very like that just seems totally like counterintuitive in general. But I look around at my life and all it is narrowing in and focusing more and like focusing more on being intentional, and that's very different. Like the last couple of years is very very different than how I've ran the rest of my life, like both what I'm working on professionally, like shifting that and getting a lot more intentional and focused, like with my relationships, my friendships, everything. um has that been for you? Like sounds like it's very similar. Like has there been, have you been like contemplating that, or is it just something you're just taking in stride, not really thinking about?
Yeah. So, like for like my home life, that's very like structured, and I would say kind of evenings, weekends, that kind of thing. Work life's kind of, well, I guess with the business and stuff, very like up and down. But
Mm-hmm.
what I try and do is, rather than like regularly doing like lots of networking, I'll go to like one big conference or something in London and meet up with other like-minded people. And I find that that is a better way of doing it, where I know I've got like a set date that I can look forward to and plan and stuff like that, rather than trying to do necessarily like a lot of it every week. I think one of the key things I've noticed is that, like, out of sight, out of mind. So since moving to a very like remote world, rather than being in London and seeing people face to face all the time, my network's not really here, it's there. And so I try and make an effort to contact people like more regularly, but fewer people. And I think that's probably the key as well, because I think otherwise you can, and not you, but not just you, but the other person can quickly like, oh, you know, you sort of forget about each other, and that's, you know, it seems like a bit of a shame to do that, you know. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot more. Like looking back at some of my friendships, like even some of my best friends. Like one of my best friends is in like Vancouver, and like we'll go through periods where we talk like once or twice a month. We'll go through other periods where we don't talk for like 8 months, 9 months, and like the time just flies by, and you're just like, whoa, what the fuck? Why have we not caught up more? And it's
yeah,
just like shit happens, and Tim Urban from Wait But Why has this amazing post called like the long tail or something like that, and he talks about how like you think about the last time, like how many times do you have left in your life, that like how many times are you and I going to talk? It's like we don't know, like, so it's like trying to like really be intentional of keeping in touch with those kind of people and strengthening those relationships. I think that's the difference, like when I was younger, is like I valued my relationships a lot, but I think I was really kind of optimizing for like meeting new people and learning from new people and like opening up doors and opportunities and such. And like now I'm like much more content with um more strengthening the relationships that I already have.
yeah. No, I fully agree with that.
um what's like, now that you have a child, like you've got a daughter now, it's just like, how do you, if she happens to grow up and like have ADHD, for example, like how do you think that you will approach that? Like both knowing what you know now, like kind of the research and everything else, but also just you personally having gone through that experience, like not being diagnosed for a long time, and like ever all knowing everything you've gone through. Like how would you approach that as a parent?
Oh, really good question. I think first of all, I would kind of explain like what it is, and like I guess kind of based on my experience. Um, and then I would probably be fairly real with um, some of the limitations with it as well. But then also, I would probably she probably is going to grow up around seeing some of the content I've produced and how that's produced in a very like positive light. So hopefully, it won't necessarily be like the end of the world. Like if she did get diagnosed with ADHD, and I think further to that, there's just more support than there was when we were kids, right? So because it was just unknown, wasn't it? So I think that that makes it kind of a little bit more. Yeah, it's makes it more of a kind of an environment that accepts the condition, and growing up in it.
Yeah, yeah. How's that transition been for you as a dad? Like, does it changed you, or do you feel like it's just something you kind of roll with the punches? Like, I've always kind of considered, I've always kind of considered like how it would change me. I guess. How's it been for you?
Yeah, I think it's changed me in that I'm kind of I'm always thinking about like how my daughter is, and like what basically like when I come home, it's probably one of the best feelings in the world when someone looks forward to you coming home and
Mm,
gives like a massive greeting and stuff.
yeah,
So I think that's part of it. And then I just think it, the top I think it's trying to think how to word it. It's definitely made me feel more responsible. I think that's the big thing. And put a lot more kind of emphasis on whatever I do is going to impact two other people, not just myself. um so I think that is part of it. I'd probably say it's made me a little bit more sensible in some ways. um but yeah, I don't know how else to describe it. um a little bit more protective, I think.
Hmm.
possibly. Yeah.
In what way?
Um, Example today. So we have a lot of problems in the UK with people going to like the local. It's not like a supermarket, but like a smaller version, like a local version, and like stealing stuff from the supermarket. But yeah, that uh, my wife was in the supermarket when it happened today, and I always think, well, this is like happening quite a lot. Could it eventually escalate towards like violence and stuff like that? So I'm like, don't go to the supermarket because it's not something that I can physically do anything about if anything happens because I'm nowhere near. So it's like, I see that as like potentially a danger that I could then prevent. So I'm kind of always thinking how, basically like as the father and husband, like how can I protect my family? And if I'm not directly there, then I have to protect them some other way. So that could be, like getting them to order the food online once a week,
Yeah.
and then like, if that's happened twice there, don't go there, So it's like that's yeah, that's I guess how an example of how I've been more protective.
How's is crime kind of increasing there in general?
Yeah, yeah, it's happening a lot. It's poverty driven, drugs driven. Uh, yeah, it is a problem. There's more security guards employed in a lot of these local places. The price of food has gone up. It's not particularly positive. And for those people who aren't homeless and rent or own a home, everything's gone up.
Yeah.
It's not a great situation.
Is that how would you say proportionately that's been affecting like your area compared to kind of the rest of the country?
Um, it's difficult to say because I don't live in the other
Sure.
parts of the
Yeah.
country. But I mean, it's gone up. So the energy bills have gone through the roof. The cost of all the food has gone up. Yeah, it's basically like um, there's a national. The government have introduced like a thing called the mortgage charter, where they're like doing 6 month holidays on, mortgages and stuff. So it's getting bad for a lot of people who are, I guess you could call them in the middle rather than so not the upper class and not um yeah, not homeless. It's kind of people in the middle, I guess.
Yeah. Where do you see it going?
Uh there's got to be some kind of change, isn't there? I
Yeah.
think we're in a recession, but there's always like an upside. It just takes a few years for it to happen.
Yeah. Things here are I don't know. I mean, I'm not really out and about locally like I used to. I don't really notice much. But across the board here in the States, like it just seems like California just seems fucking crazy. Like all the videos of like people just going in and like just shoplifting and like apparently like they're not even like prosecuting these people. I mean, hard to know how much of that's like really truly at the level that they're advertising it to be and how much of it's just media hype. But I do know several
Yeah,
people like in like LA, for example, that have lived there for most of their life and they're like leaving or have left because they're just like shit's just bad. So it's just like it just seems like the pressure cooker is just increasingly increasing like in every aspect, like you said, like food. What rent is fucking insane over here. Sounds like it is over there too, where it's just like I don't
well, yeah, the
know. Go on.
oh, I was just going to say what there's been a sort of a crisis around renters recently, where because the mortgage rates of interest rates have gone up, landlords who own several houses have started to sell off their houses. And for those people who haven't been kicked out, there's been more like there's been more choice, less choices for renters, so the landlords can basically like do what they want a lot of the time. So that could be everything from like putting the rent up to and it's not in line with the cost of living for the person living there, or not doing repairs and then basically kicking them out if they don't like and say, well, we're not going to do the repair, and then you have to leave as well because you've asked to do it. And so what the problem with that is that they haven't put any kind of legislation in place, which is in other parts of Europe, like Germany and Switzerland. They have like renters' rights, um, which is pretty bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really see how it could continue in the trajectory that it's going without there being like serious like unrest, because like even here where the cost of living has historically been like very cheap, like rent is getting insane, and like you said, like across the board, like food prices are increasing, energy prices are going up, gas is high but not nearly as high as it used to be, so it's not that bad, but like everything across the board is like just increasing to the point where like people that were already struggling, like people that are working, not the salary isn't that high, they're hourly, and the people that are like already were kind of struggling. I mean, it's getting to the point where like some people I know that are service industry are like barely able to like get by, where they have to live with like two or three people in a place, and then like I have several friends right now that are looking to rent a house because they're fucking done living in an apartment and they can't find a house. Like they're getting
Yeah,
snatched up. Like any rentals are getting snatched up like day of, and it's just to the point where it's just like I don't see how it's at some point like shit's gonna drop, and I don't know like when that is. Like I think as like the boomers start to die off, you're going to have a whole lot of housing that's going to like open into the market that'll probably lower the cost, I would assume, with supply and demand. But like,
yeah, or
when's
the
that
the
going to
more
happen?
expensive, yeah, the more expensive houses as well. If they can't reach their if they can't pay their mortgage because the interest rates are obviously, they've got a higher monthly payment, then that could release some houses into the market, and then those more expensive ones that are over um the yeah, basically like they could end up kind of going down in price. So there's all
Yeah.
sorts of speculation about it. No one really knows until it happens. It's also with childcare as well, because here there's a large amount of the workforce that's women, and they're trying to encourage the women to go back to work. But then the cost of childcare is so high that it would
Mm,
actually be easier. It would make more financial sense for them to stay at home, which means a lot of the economy and the talent is not going back into the workforce. Um, and so they're trying to introduce more like benefits and funds for that, but there aren't actually the people to do it, because a lot of the nurseries have gone bust because of everything costing too much and not being able to sustain it. So there's like all these kind of things that are happening that aren't necessarily positive towards like getting more people into work and everything else.
yeah. Yeah. And all along the way, like people are fucking suffering and like we already
Yeah.
had a mental health epidemic and now it's like compounding and getting worse. Like I mean COVID really pushed a lot of people over the edge, and I would be curious to see if they've done any numbers or if they go back historically and look at like just I mean how many fucking like suicides and shit like over the happened over fucking COVID and everything, loneliness, isolation, the mental instability, everything, and like it seems like that it's getting worse, and so it's just like taking into consideration like the mental health side of things. It's like yeah, I don't know where it's all going. Like I have some um on the mental health side, like you have like the societal aspect, and then you just have the baseline lack of treatment for like mental health and like lack of awareness and all that stuff. On that part, I think things may get better because like like you've got the we were talking about earlier, like the awareness through like things like TikTok and stuff like that. Like people are becoming educated on through really casual means that like all these different types of mental health conditions that they may have. They're seeing themselves in it, but also I've noticed that like the flavor of like Gen Z and like the way that they approach mental health is just so much more healthier. They're much more open and they're much more transparent, and there's way less of a stigma, and there it seems like it's a lot more supportive, like as far as a generation of like encouraging people to get help and to be more vocal about it instead of repressing it, and so like I have a lot of optimism when it comes to like Gen Z, and then the next generation, it should probably be like your daughter's generation that's going to come up, and I think that's all going to be good. And then on the other side of it is the technology is like the personalized healthcare like you were talking about. Like I think that the all these AI and machine learning algorithms are basically going to look at all this data. And I'm already seeing it. I'm already seeing like a lot of this personalized healthcare coming to market. But what happens, like, for example, when you mix that with the mental health side, and you can take like somebody's, their gut biome test and like all these other things and mix it with like these personality tests that are like super laser targeted to try and address these things. And you get personalized recommendations, both physically and mentally. And then maybe that gets mixed with like tech, like imagine like the Apollo thing that I'm wearing, but like 10 years from now, and it's like in real time, like it's way more effective, the technology's better, and it's in real time, like synced with everything. Like, for example, I'm gonna get an Aura ring soon. I've got an Apple Watch, but the Aura ring actually syncs with this Apollo and your Apple Health, and in real time will use the biometrics from your Aura ring and actually communicate with the Apollo and actually change the frequency of what it's using based on your biometrics. And Aura Ring just came out, I think, in the last 2 weeks with like a stress signal. And apparently people are saying it's like really accurate. Like it'll actually read your stress levels like in real time. And that will then send it to the Apollo and then in real time, like actually physically stimulate you. And you can actually see like your stress levels like going down. I mean, and that's
Wow.
now. I mean, like just think about where the tech's gonna be, 5-10 years from now. Like it's really fucking cool. So like I don't know. Where do you see things going? Are you optimistic, I guess, where the direction, or do you
Um,
think that like society's still going in kind of a net negative direction?
it seems to me like if you take the NHS, like the healthcare system here, they've got a problem with people just getting an appointment from a GP, a general practitioner, and apparently they're using ChatGPT to introduce that into
Huh.
select GP practices for like the first line diagnosis. So almost see it a bit like when you put a support ticket in for IT, it's
Yeah.
you never the first line support's like, oh yeah, it's templated, or somebody who's a junior. But then the second and third lines like, oh, we've got a real problem here, we're going to have to step in. So I think it's going to be a bit like that. um and I think I also see that with that there'll be the help get like finding things out earlier are always going to be key, aren't they? And if you're able to do that because there's less waiting time, even better. um but yeah, I mean, like, psychiatrists in the UK is all remote now. It's not you can see somebody locally, but that's not an indication as to whether that practice are any good or not. So you've got a thing you can do here called the right to choose. So instead of just going from your GP and then getting diagnosed to referred to whoever the psychiatrist is locally, you can say, I want to choose this practice. I think there'll be more of that. There'll be more choice with AI.
Yeah, it's super interesting because like here in the States, like there's benefits to the privatized healthcare. Like there's some benefits where like you can choose whoever the fuck you want whenever you want. Like, for the most part. You can get in with people really quickly. And if like once, I had this recently with my dentist. Like last year, I needed a new dentist. The one that we had like sold the practice and left and retired or whatever the hell they did. And like the new people, I just didn't, I don't know, weird vibe, didn't like them. So like I was calling around and, most of them were like, oh yeah, you know what, we're like 2-3 months out for first time patients. And then there was one I called and they had great reviews and people on Reddit recommended them and they're like, yeah, we can get you in next week. And I'm like, okay, done. Like I'm going with you, like, so like that was, and they turned out to be awesome, and it's like, that's part of the flexibility that you get around here. But also it's like on the flip side, I'm having like, I had to have some of my medications compounded at a lab. Like it's like super custom. So I had to have it like custom done. The stuff that I have the prescriptions, the two that I have to have compounded, they're both covered under my insurance. It's just that I have to have like a custom dosing. And so I have to submit these reimbursement forms and the amount of fucking bullshit that I have to go through and the stuff that they require, even though one fucking the receipt that I get from the compounding lab states like half the stuff that they need, they're like, no, 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 no. You have to include the same shit on this form, and then you have to have a pharmacist like signature off on this thing, and you have to do this, and you have to do that. And basically it's like 8 steps just to go through this process, which should be as simple as like, hey, here's my receipt, here you go, here's the number for the compounding lab, and if they can give you any more information. It should be that simple. It's not. And you have to like physically mail it or fax it, and it's like you can't email it, and it's like they make it so fucking difficult. And then when you do it, they come back and say, oh no, no, we need all this other stuff as well. So the whole process takes months and months and months, and I feel like they do
Yeah.
that just so that it's such a pain in the ass.
So you give
You don't
up.
want to do it.
That's why
Yeah.
they do it, don't they? So you give up.
And
Yeah.
dude, like at the Cleveland Clinic, like they do some stuff that's like kind of new, like, somewhat like they say experimental, even though there's like 10 years of fucking clinical trials like backing all this stuff up. There's a reason why the Cleveland Clinic's doing it. And so like they're doing all this tests. Every single time I get blood work done, they take 15 vials of blood. It's a lot. So I have to make sure like I eat afterwards. Get very lightheaded because you have to fast. It's like overnight. And so yeah, like my point of bringing it up is because like I will do that, and every fucking time they send letters back saying like, yeah, we're denying this claim because this is not considered medically necessary. So then my doctors at the Cleveland Clinic have to send them a letter that states all the reasons why, and then they come back and then they review it, and then they say, oh, actually, okay, yeah, we will approve this. And it's like, why are you even going through that process? Like, I've had to have this blood work done 10 times. Every single time they go through this process. And it's just like, and that's time and effort that somebody has to physically sit there and review it and look at it. And it's just inflating the cost. Like the whole thing is just fucked. But at the same time, hey, at least we can get in a little bit sooner. So it's just like the whole thing is just fucking infuriating. I mean, would you trade systems, or would you keep it how it is on your
Uh,
side of the pond?
Hard to know, as in I haven't tried yours, but yeah, I haven't gone private, so I've no kind of idea what it would be like. The diagnosis process for ADHD has been some sort of controversy around private clinics doing it a little
Huh?
bit quickly,
Why?
and yeah, just like to get the prescription and get more people diagnosed. But as in like the actual when they go and do the test and like number of questions they're asking, all that kind of thing. So I would much prefer to wait, which is what I did, and get a psychiatrist to do it on the NHS.
Huh? So like the private is just kind of like speed running through it.
Not all of them, just select practices. So I don't want to sort of badmouth all private practices, but that's what there was a documentary about it, and that also has put like a negative connotation on how it's easy to get diagnosed for ADHD and potentially everyone has it, and it's just like that doesn't really help. So it's kind of yeah, but that's I think all of that is spun out of not there's always like one thing that's a consequence of the other. So there's too many people on a waiting list. People want to go private, get it done quicker, which is fair enough.
Yeah. How do you see things, both kind of in larger society, but also like just like in the entrepreneur world? How do you see the stigma of like mental health changing? Because like definitely seems on my end like the vibe is changing. People are a lot more open and honest to it. For me
Yeah,
personally, I've noticed that like um, whenever I go on other people's podcasts, like because I'm so open about the mental health side, like everyone wants to talk about that. They're really excited by it. There's been several business podcasts or like e-commerce podcasts that I've gone on that don't even talk about anything outside of like business, and
yeah.
like they will open that up to me because like they find the topic interesting. And so it does seem like there's interest there, and it does seem like things are changing. But um, yeah, I don't know. What are you seeing?
It's probably a generational thing, I think.
Mm.
So I think, yeah, like I say, it's if you look at I think it's being definitely being accepted more, and I think it also it's not just a generational thing. I think it's an industry specific thing. So some industries, like the one we work in, tech, probably much more inclusive and diverse, right? So and that's good, but they're also newer industries, aren't they? So they're sort of inventing things as they get the demand from their employees. Some old school industries are more like, oh well, this is the way that we do things, so that's kind of yeah. So maybe it's more of a challenge for somebody who's neurodiverse to work in those industries. I don't know because I haven't worked in those industries, so I couldn't comment.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, what do you see in general? Like, is there any other like trends or anything coming up that you see that you think is really interesting?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the way we learn is changing, and I think that's from experimentation. So when we had lockdown, there was a big surge in e-learning, and that was great until we realized that actually we were just like consuming YouTube videos and taking notes, and we don't just learn that way. We learn different ways. And so that's kind of introduced like a new way of like blended learning where maybe you learn on like a video call or a virtual workshop, but at the same time there's like follow-up sessions, and there's like micro follow-up sessions where you're doing like 15-30 minute recap sessions rather than just doing learning as like a one-off thing. You're having to implement that learning. You're having to teach other people what you've just learned so that you can then get kind of that marked in terms of how much you've understood and how much you haven't. And I think that's a really positive thing because it makes learning like more accessible to like like a wider range of people. That to me I think is really 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 interesting. The more the just the kind of research that we're finding from that. And I think also like the AI stuff super interesting around research as well, because we can summarize like large amounts of medical research, which previously has had these kind of very like long format, hard to read, like medical language. And it can summarize these huge data sets to actually make them useful. And I think that to me is kind of, hugely valuable.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that goes back to like, like a lot of, I think AI is going to be so beneficial for people with ADHD in general because like there's a couple things that I see it doing. A, like taking all these ideas and all these concepts and everything that you have and helping you organize them and then simplify. And that has
Yeah.
helped me so much. Like, I'm kind of shifting into, like you and I've talked about, like I'm kind of shifting into, kind of doing advising and I guess coaching. I hate the fucking term coaching, but for like individual entrepreneurs, like particularly like solopreneurs and stuff like that, versus, e-commerce and stuff. So like as I've been kind of thinking about like shifting and, making that transition, I've been doing so much. I mean, basically all the same research and all the same shit that I would do for a brand, positioning and all this other stuff and thinking about all of it. And I swear to God, like ChatGPT has been like a fucking co-founder in this, like for me, like it's been so beneficial because I'll take like pages and pages of all these different ideas that I have and say, okay, what's the commonalities here? Can you boil it down to a couple different themes? And what is the best way in which you would describe this? And I don't always use what it does verbatim, but like it gives me a lot of ideas and it helps figure out what the signals and the noise are. And it consolidates a lot of this stuff and it's just been super fucking helpful in doing all that. I mean, I basically treat it like an assistant, and it's just
Mm.
super
Yeah.
helpful for organizing and distilling what can be very overwhelming. Because I know for me, like I love having a bunch of different concepts and working from them, but so sometimes you have so many different concepts, it can be really hard to like narrow it down and whittle it down.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
the other thing is, I think it'll help you a lot with um, narrowing your options because you can give it a whole lot of pros and cons and then give it all this data and then just say like, okay, what are the two or three different options that you would proceed with or whatever. So I think just having all that data and being able to like simplify would be
I think
so useful.
it'll also be like if you think what people put in as a prompt, they don't. If you wanted like a simplified decision, they don't always give it all of the information it needs because that requires like much more input, which
For
is
sure.
maybe like the human's fault in some ways. So if once the simplification of the input, like integration, and I know it has like plugins and that kind of thing, but A, not everyone's aware of those, and B, it's kind of like, well, how effective are they at this stage? So it's kind of like figuring all that out, and then it's like, oh, would there be like a plug? You just click on this plugin, it goes, right, okay, there's my Notion, here's all my ideas. Like, what do you think I should do with this next? You know?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's where I'm at. Like I want to give it as much data as possible. I would like I would say compared to like January or February or whenever like the big push with like GBT happened and everything just kind of went off, I would say that like that is probably the biggest benefit that it, Claude having that out of the box, Google's Bard now like being hooked up to all of Google, and then GBT has all the plugins that have kind of opened it up. I still think GBT's got some way to go as far as the
Mm.
integrations. They're not super great compared to what I would where I'd like them to be, but you can see where they're going. However, I will say GBT is considerably worse than when it launched, like four.
Yeah,
I don't know if you noticed it, but it feels nerfed to me. Like all the I have to give it so many conditional um I have to give it so many conditional responses to get anything to the point I want. It just seems dumber. It's the outputs are not nearly as good because like I said, I've been using it for like positioning and all this other stuff. And some of the concepts, like I would give it all these different things, and some of the iterations it would come up with, I'm like, man, that's amazing. Like I don't even need to tweak it much. Now I
yeah.
get this stuff and I'm like, this isn't that great. Like again, this is like a junior person doing it, and like I have to sit there and do a lot of work. And I just noticed that like it's not just me. Like a lot of people I know are just like this thing is fucking nerfed, and like I really hope they fix it because I kind of miss it. Like I used to use GBT every day, and it's like I haven't used it in like a week and a half now. Like it's just not nearly as effective as it used to be. So I don't
So
know,
what do
but
you
I'm
use now then? Do you use like Claude or?
yeah, I've been using Claude a little bit more, but even Claude, like Claude's kind of dumb. It's good at like big data. So like I've been taking like a lot of transcripts from the podcast and putting it in there and using it and saying, okay, well, what are the commonalities? What are the themes? What are all the other stuff? And I've been using it for that. There's other AI tools that are a lot better than that. Decipher is one of them. There's a couple other like really good AI tools I've been using, but I've been using Claude for some things, but I think I've just been using the tools a little bit less, like the language model things like Claude and GPT. But I've been using more use case specific things, like Decipher and like some of these other tools, a lot more that have more specific uses. So I don't know. I'm hoping that like OpenAI kind of like it sounds like they've been getting a lot of complaints lately about the quality of GPTs, so I'm hoping they like fix shit. I'm assuming all the changes they made were a for potential ethical and legal reasons, like they've been limiting, putting a lot more governors on things, but I think they've been
Mm.
throttling it just for cost. I think they've been trying to significantly lower the amount of resources that they're using to be more profitable and or at least lose less money. um, but I don't know. It's not nearly as great as it was when it first started, in my opinion. But I am really excited with where it's going. I think it's
Mm.
going to be really cool.
Yeah, definitely.
What 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 trying to think about like in terms of like the AI route, because I feel like there's just so much more we could cover. But in general, what have been the one thing that I wanted to ask you that we haven't gotten to yet is like what are the top books and resources that you've come across as far as like the ADHD side of things? Because I there's like some people that there's like some people that like tend to be like what is it, Russell Barkley, like the main doctor, like he seems to be who a lot of people talk about, but it seems like there's not really a general consensus. I see a lot of people recommending different things. Is there anything that like kind of stands out to you at all?
Yeah, I mean, there was a documentary that I watched on Amazon called The Disruptors, which I thought was really good.
Disruptors.
Um, and yeah, I'm trying to think. So ADHD 2.0, that's another good one. There's one that's just recently come out from like an influencer couple on Instagram. So they're on like Instagram, possibly TikTok, called ADHD Love, and they've written a book called Dirty Laundry,
Huh.
and I quite like that because it's much more. It's not written by a doctor, that kind of thing. It's written by like a couple. The guy is neurotypical, I think, and then she's got ADHD, and yeah, I think that's quite good because it's more like relatable.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, just to kind of like wrap things up, like what so you've got HYPAA, which I want to talk about that here in a minute before we fully wrap up. But you've got HYPAA, and you've been really focused on like ADHD and this whole community and kind of doing all that. But where do you see? I guess we could start off like you can do in general like the ADHD, but then I want to kind of circle into like you personally. Like, where do you see things going with ADHD? Like, kind of general broad spectrum, like where things are going. We touch on a lot of it, like the neuroscience side, AI, and the trends and everything. But like, is there anything you kind of see that we haven't touched on yet?
yeah. I think like you when you talked about the AI, it's like some of the implementation within some of the software tools that are already out there that are kind of like, I guess, pitching themselves to people with ADHD. Um, Probably best to, before we go into those, to talk about a common topic, which is adults with ADHD try something and then um, basically don't end up using it afterwards. So the novelty and the dopamine factor is a really good example where, let's say you've got a really good to-do list and it's perfectly good, but you go, right, okay, there's a new to-do list that comes along. It's not that the new or the old to-do list one was better than the other. It's actually the process of you putting it down into the new to-do list is a great way of
Okay.
you feeling good about completing something, which is another dopamine hit, right? But I think in terms of some of the technologies, I think the big problem at the moment is they're disparate technologies that don't work together. Whereas in actual fact, we kind of almost, I think in the future, we'd need like some kind of workstation approach. So some of the ones that I think are worth looking into, you've got like Motion app where it kind of rejigs your calendar based on what kind of if you've got a meeting and you can time block and all that kind of stuff. I think that's quite effective because it's almost like works like a smart calendarly. Um,
Huh.
so I think use Motion's quite an interesting one. Like Morgan.so I quite like as well, which is another kind of like calendar integration type tool, which is cool. I'm trying to think of any others I haven't mentioned. I think ones where you've got like a timer on, quite interesting as well. Like there's Llama Life is quite an interesting one that does that. So it's like an ADHD like friendly task management tool, which is quite interesting. So these specific tech are popping up all over the place. I think the challenge will be is if it doesn't integrate with something that you already have day to day, like Google Calendar, like Gmail, those kind of things, because then it's like another thing that you need to update. So the examples of those are like the iOS and Android apps that you see that are like, oh, here's a great habit checker, but then you've got to update the habit thing each time, which inevitably you might forget to do. So it's those kind of things I think that can be a challenge. Um, yeah,
Yeah, that's been my biggest issue. Is a lot of those apps like they require to work, you have to put in like everything that you're doing and this and that, and I'm just like, that's just another fucking thing I gotta do, and I gotta say, and that's why I never do them, because it's like it's kind of a catch 22.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. um all right, what about your life? Like, what do you see things going? Like, what's I think we talked about this the last time, like when we were talking about networking and all that stuff, but that was a couple years ago. Like, how do you see the trajectory of your life going? Like, what do you kind of focus on over the next couple of years, other than obviously family and stuff like that? But professionally, what are you doing? Like, you've got the HYPAA, which we can kind of wrap up and talk about, but like, do you see yourself continuing to kind of like work in this space, or is this just kind of an individual project that you're doing?
Yeah, I think so I think it will evolve and change like over time. So in regards to Hyper, currently it's like an e-learning offering, but I see it moving more towards being like almost like a research and education consultancy, but done on kind of a virtual basis,
Huh.
where we can kind of recommend and have tools maybe that other people have built, but also education around that. And I think continuing to do that. So I almost want to like tier it in two ways. So it's kind of like the e-learning education should be accessible to like lots of people that have just about to find out they've got ADHD or already have and kind of want some, want a resource to go to. And then the other side to that in terms of our sort of premium or paid um, offering is going to be around the workplace and really like helping all types of people, not just adults with ADHD, with issues around focus, distraction, and interruptions and prioritization, because those are and basically doing more research in that area. So that's something I'm conducting at the moment, where I'm looking to interview and survey like human resources, HR, and learning and development senior executives, and we already had a few of those contribute in large UK based companies, and basically like find out what the challenges are in the workplace and see like how those productivity challenges are affecting not just workplace well-being but also the company performance as well, and being able to help with that, because I think any challenge for somebody who already has an executive functioning disorder, it could also be a potential challenge for somebody who's neurotypical, so, and the world's changed, so it needs a new approach that is geared towards like the hybrid workforce of home and office.
Yeah, that sounds cool as shit. So,
Yeah.
um, what? How would you describe hyper to people? What? I mean, guess what? Kind of wrapping things up. What would you kind of tell people about hyper to get to check it out?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if people are interested in hyper, I think probably the thing that they should probably look at is like hyper energy, which is the e-learning course of like 60 minutes, and that's around using exercise, rest, diet, and habit forming to improve your almost like a workout for your brain. And as I say, that's kind of accessible to anybody who wants to like buy it online. Just go to hyper.com. So it's like hyppa.com/hyperenergy. And then they can see samples of the actual video without having to buy it. And then if they want to take it, then they can do that and basically join a community of other people that are also, doing hyper energy as a sort of a lifestyle change.
Hell yeah! Is there anything else that we didn't touch on you want to talk about before we wrap up?
No, I think we covered everything. Yeah.
Hell yeah! Alrighty, man. This has been fun. Until next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is it for this episode. Let me know what you thought in the comments, and if you enjoyed this, it would mean the world to me if you could give us a quick like on this video and subscribe to the channel. I know everybody asked for this, but that really is the best way you can kind of help us out. We'll be able to grow the channel, put more resources into this, and get some of the dream guests that I really want to have on for you guys. Also, if you use podcast apps, be sure to look up The Josh Boone Show on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever the hell you listen to podcasts, and we show up on your feed there too. So, until next time, peace y'all.